There is a chapter of Earth's story carved beneath miles of ice. A secret written not in ink or stone, but in frozen water itself. Tonight, we travel to the end of the world. To a continent so vast and so forbidding that it has hidden what may be the oldest traces of human civilization ever buried. Beneath Antarctica's shimmering whiteness, radar images reveal structures no glacier should remember. Grids, corridors, and mountains shaped far too perfectly for nature's clumsy hand. Scientists call them anomalies. Historians call them impossible. Yet as the ice melts faster each year, the impossible edges closer to proof. Before this century ends, the world may find that humanity's first great empire was not built under the sun, but entombed in eternal night. And when those frozen doors finally open, what emerges will not just change history. It will challenge the very idea of who we are. If the ice were to melt tomorrow, what sleeping secret would stir beneath it? And what would that truth change about us? In every age, humans have drawn their world as far as their courage allowed, and then, at the uncertain edges of parchment or thought, written the same small phrase: "Here be monsters." For thousands of years, the southern half of our planet carried that inscription like a bruise. No one had seen it, yet everyone assumed it waited there, vast, cold, and terrible. From the polished minds of the ancient Greeks came the first idea of this invisible continent. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land, a necessary weight to balance the continents they knew above the equator. To philosophers like Aristotle, the world was poetry masquerading as geometry, and such symmetry demanded an unseen land to steady the sphere. For the great thinkers of that age, belief in this hidden south was not fantasy. It was mathematics. Centuries later, their poetic geometry began to mingle with the tales of sailors who drifted far beyond familiar coasts. Phoenician traders spoke of icebergs glimmering in the dark sea like shattered moons. Polynesian navigators whispered of skies that never ended and waters that bit like teeth. By the time medieval cartographers carved their maps onto vellum, the southern continent had grown from abstraction into conviction. Artists filled its outlines with monsters borrowed from nightmares, serpents twisting through imagined bays, winged whales tearing at ships, kingdoms of silver where the sun never rose. It did not matter that no one had touched its soil. The absence of knowledge fed imagination better than truth ever could. When the age of discovery dawned, the unknown began to compress. Portuguese and Spanish ships swept around the African and South American continents, probing farther south than any had dared. They hunted not only for spices and trade winds, but also for confirmation that the legend of Terra Australis was real. The farther they sailed, the more the map bent toward truth, though each revelation only deepened the riddle. Sailors from Magellan's fleet described waters so cold that ice drifted through them like ghosts. Whalers returning from the far south spoke of coasts shrouded in mist, their mountains glistening under crystalline white curtains. Yet none could say they had reached solid land. In the collective imagination of the world, the great southern continent remained half dream, half rumor, moving each time we tried to hold it. Then came the 18th century, an age when Europe's hunger for certainty swallowed every mystery it could find. Navigators like Captain James Cook ventured farther than anyone before, enduring months of bitter storms as they chased the horizon. When Cook's ship crossed the Antarctic Circle in 1773, it was a passage not only through ice, but through the boundary between speculation and science. His men saw drifting islands of ice larger than cities, and at times the sea itself froze solid beneath them. Cook never glimpsed the continent. He turned back, writing that the region was condemned to eternal frost. Yet he proved it existed. Something enormous lurked beyond the mist. The monster at the map's bottom had become real, and its reality was colder than anyone imagined. The 19th century finally tore aside the veil. Sealing vessels accidentally struck coasts of black rock and sparkling peaks. The first pieces of its true name, Antarctica, entered literature and speech. Nations raced to claim fragments of this new world, if only to say they possessed what others could not even reach. Still, after all the ships, the measuring tools, the flags, and the photographs, the continent kept its heart a secret. We had erased the monsters from its edges, only to conjure new ones hidden within. Once the boundary of our ignorance moved past the sea horizon, it sank downward through the ice itself. The questions no longer lay in what seas surrounded Antarctica, but what stories slept beneath its glaciers. Modern explorers stare not at blank parchment, but at satellite screens. Their ships slice through pack ice with steel hulls instead of oak. Yet the same feeling clings to them. The belief that somewhere in this white abyss lies a truth older than civilization. The arguments of philosophers have turned into seismic graphs, and the monsters have evolved into hypotheses. Still, the emotion is the same awe, laced with unease. The edge of the map no longer marks the border of oceans. It runs through the surface of the earth, into miles of frozen crust that cover mountains, valleys, and perhaps something built by hands that time forgot. Beneath the illusion of emptiness, Antarctica waits, and even in the age of satellites, it remains the world's final secret. For all its blinding emptiness, Antarctica hides more terrain than any other continent within the smallest range of color. From orbit, it looks simple, white, seamless, sterile. But modern instruments know better. Radar, which can see through ice the way light passes through glass, returns images that challenge the eye and stretch imagination. Beneath that frozen armor lies a continent full of shape and shadow. Mountains sharp as teeth, valleys plunging deeper than the Grand Canyon, and rivers that still snake through blackness, moving so slowly they might as well be time itself. Scientists now speak of this subterranean world as a mirror Earth, a hidden continent within a continent, older than memory, wider than Europe, and untouched by air or sun for 34 million years. The story of how such a place formed begins long before humans existed, when Antarctica was green. In that age, warm seas lapped at tropical coasts, and forests taller than cathedrals marched across its plateaus. Then, tectonic edges shifted like restless sleepers. The land drifted toward the pole, severing the last ocean currents that had kept it temperate. Cold bled from the heavens, and snow began to fall without melting. In centuries, that felt like flickers on the planet's scale. Snowfall thickened into glaciers. Glaciers fused into sheets, and the sheets became a single radiant continent of ice. Its weight pressed the crust downward by almost a mile. Even mountains bent under it, like wood beneath a glacier's grind. What had been a living paradise slipped quietly into hibernation, preserved by cold the way history preserves itself in myth. The ice did more than bury the land. It locked time away. Each snowfall added a page to Earth's diary, pressing earlier ones tight until air itself froze into crystal letters. Within those layers, continents of bacteria, pollen, volcanic dust, and even ghostly fragments of seawater antibiotics sleep together. Chemistry suspended at -50 degrees. Deep in the heart of Dome Sea, researchers have drilled cores that reach backward nearly 1 million years, reading the planet's climate like verse etched in frost. Yet below even those records lies another archive, the terrain itself. because no wind or rain or sunlight reaches it. Erosion halted, seasons stopped, and an ancient landscape remains nearly unaltered, as if encased within the world's oldest museum display. In 2009, satellite surveys startled geologists by revealing chains of peaks hidden 2 miles beneath the central ice. The Gamburtsev Mountains. Tooth-shaped summits rise from invisible valleys, each taller than the Alps, all sheathed in solid water. No one can say what flora or fauna once wandered their slopes before burial. Some scientists imagine coniferous forests wet with rain. Others believe the range was already cold, a fortress waiting for the freeze. Between those ridges flow trapped rivers lubricating the underside of the ice sheet, winding into thousands of black-water lakes that have never seen open sky. Each drop that circulates down there is older than the first sparks of civilization. Lake Vostok, the largest and strangest, covers an area comparable to Lake Ontario, yet lies sealed under 2,300 meters of ice. Its waters endure immense pressure and darkness deeper than the sea. When robotic probes first touched its edges, they found organisms that defied expectations. Bacteria with genetic sequences unknown in any catalog. Whether they evolved in isolation or represent migrants from ancient oceans is uncertain, but their existence proves the impossible. Even in total confinement, life endures. The continent beneath the cold is not dead. It dreams in slow motion, whispering through currents that never break the surface. Each discovery adds another dimension to mystery. Radar images show the sinuous paths of buried rivers, and seismographs echo through hidden caves, hinting at vast pockets of air or liquid water. Some of these chambers, scientists suggest, remain warm from geothermal heat rising through an underworld of volcanic fissures. Others might hold long-frozen soil where plant tissues and microbes still wait to wake. To reach them is to gamble with contamination. One careless descent could rewrite history or erase it. So for now, humanity stands atop the lid of a time capsule, reading its vibrations and reflections. Occasionally, storms clear enough for the ice above to glow blue like sapphire. Researchers look across its endlessness and realize that somewhere below, rivers still flow in silence. They are rivers without names, guided by gravity older than humanity's first question. And within that dark landscape, every rock and grain of sediment may still remember sunlight. Antarctica does not surrender its history. It keeps it under pressure, like breath held too long. Someday, when the ice thins and curiosity descends deeper than caution, the continent beneath the cold may exhale, revealing a world that never truly died, but simply waited out eternity beneath the weight of its own secret. In the deepest cold, scientists listen not with ears, but with drills. Each rotation bites through centuries, curling ribbons of ice toward the surface like messages retrieved from the abyss. What they extract are pale cylinders, gleaming, translucent, beautiful in their precision. Look closely, and every slender line inside them tells a story written not in ink or stone, but in air itself. These cores are the Earth's diaries. Each winter's snowfall seals a thin layer of gas and dust, stacking one year atop another until miles of frozen atmosphere form, unbroken, meticulous, impossibly patient. The drill heads hum, and out come pages of time. When researchers first examined these samples under laboratory light, they were not expecting poetry. They expected data. Concentrations of carbon dioxide, traces of sulfur, the fingerprint of old volcanoes. Yet what awaited them was both. Sections turned faintly gray, speckled with volcanic ash so fine it could drift through a needle's eye. Elsewhere, shimmering bands of salt marked the passage of ancient seas. Inside, the bubbles caught between crystals. Scientists heard the quiet hiss of breaths exhaled by forests long extinct. Some of those samples carried the same mix of gases we breathe today. Others whispered of atmospheres so alien they might have belonged to another world entirely. The first surprise came when data loggers plotted isotopic ratios of oxygen and hydrogen, tiny variations that reveal global temperature. Graphs showed the ebb and flow of ice ages as graceful as the rise and fall of music. But then anomalies appeared. Spikes of warmth so sudden and severe they defied natural rhythm. In the midst of a frozen era, the planet had pulsed with heat intense enough to melt the edges of continents. These bursts lasted brief geological moments, centuries or even mere decades, then vanished, followed by an even deeper chill. The question haunted every research tent across the frozen plateau. What could ignite such fire in a world of ice? One theory pointed to volcanoes, the planet's ancient exhalations. Layers rich in sulfur corresponded to massive eruptions, their ash spreading through the atmosphere like veils. But some spikes contained no volcanic signature at all. Others carried isotopes of heavy carbon and nitrogen that suggested temperatures far beyond what any eruption could sustain. Something had warmed the Earth with furious consistency, and then disappeared without trace. Some scientists argued for asteroid impacts, heavenly intrusions capable of boiling oceans. But those leave iridium, the cosmic calling card, and the cores show nothing of the sort. Others wondered if methane escaping from ancient seabeds might have turned the sky into glass for a time. Yet there was another whisper buried deeper in the data. Embedded dust particles, analyzed grain by grain, showed ratios of metals rarely found in natural deposits. Refined alloys scattered within layers 33 million years old. The samples were too small for proof, but not too small for wonder. As debates circled like the Antarctic wind, the ice kept offering its mute confessions. In one region beneath Dome Fuji, a core segment emitted an unfamiliar shimmer under ultraviolet light. Within those crystals, spectrometers detected isotopes of beryllium and chlorine, usually generated by bursts of cosmic radiation. That meant the planet had once been struck by an energy surge from beyond of the solar wind. Either a distant supernova's echo or something nearer, unknown. Whatever the source, its heat would have sparked extremes of weather almost unimaginable. Storms capable of drowning continents before freezing them solid again. Through this revelation, Antarctica's serenity became an illusion. The continent was not merely a graveyard for snow, but a crime scene written in code. Each core, stacked and cataloged in frozen vaults, became a testimony of resilience and disaster. Scholars handling them sometimes pause mid-measurement, struck by reverence rather than curiosity. They know they're touching air older than humanity itself. Air that once filled lungs of creatures we will never name. Between the lines of chemistry lie unspoken questions. What if heat once emanated from within, not above? Could a forgotten civilization, ancient beyond reckoning, have altered its world so dramatically that only the ice remembers? Most dismiss such speculation as fantasy, but even they admit that the pattern of warmth appears deliberate, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat lost in time. When evening falls at the research stations, the snow outside glows blue under moonlight. The cores rest in metal racks, solid, silent, each a column of memory. Wind howls beyond their walls, and the scientists sit quietly, listening to the faint crackle of shifting crystals in deep freeze. The sound is like tiny voices, echoes of the planet speaking its old language of water and air. In those murmurs, one phrase seems to repeat again and again. Something burned here. But no one can yet say what or who lit the fire beneath Antarctica before the world turned white. On a winter afternoon in 1929, inside the Imperial Palace archives of Istanbul, a group of historians unrolled a tattered sheet of parchment and found the world gazing back at them, though not quite the world they expected. The map was drawn in vibrant inks of blue, red, and green. Its coastlines traced with the delicate certainty of someone who had seen more than he should have. At the bottom edge, where medieval maps often fade into monsters or sermon, this one displayed a strange sweep of land curling toward the southern horizon. Mountains rose from that coast, bays carved into it as if softened by centuries of tide. According to its author, the Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis, it was a faithful reconstruction compiled from ancient charts. The date inked beside his signature was 1513, 300 years before anyone is supposed to have reached Antarctica. The discovery should have been a historical curiosity, another fine example of early cartography. Yet the southern land refused to behave like myth. When 20th century researchers overlaid Piri Reis's drawing onto modern projections of the globe, something unsettling emerged. Parts of his coastline matched the contour of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica with surprising precision, not as it appears now buried beneath miles of ice, but as it would look if the ice were gone. For some, it was coincidence born of guesswork. For others, evidence that strangers from forgotten centuries had already mapped the world's final frontier. Who could those strangers be? Piri Reis himself claimed he had used 20 charts: Arabic, Indian, Portuguese, even one from the age of Alexander the Great, piecing them together into a synthesis of inherited knowledge. Scholars know that ancient mariners, particularly Greeks, Phoenicians, and Carthaginians, were astonishing navigators. Could fragments of their charts, copied and recopied through endless ages, have preserved a memory of lands glimpsed in warmer epochs when Antarctica lay free of ice? Critics counter that the resemblance is optical illusion. The drawn coast could represent South America's exaggerated tail rather than a hidden continent. But the notion lingered, irresistible precisely because it remained uncertain. For the believers, the map is a keyhole into deep time. They imagine a seafaring culture predating recorded history, a civilization skilled enough to survey the globe when seas were lower and the world warmer. If such mariners existed, their legacy would have been scattered through the flood myths and maritime lore of countless peoples, surviving long enough for an Ottoman admiral to inherit their vision. Others, more cautious, see in the story a demonstration of how human memory folds into geography, how rumor and observation fuse into a pattern that generations later becomes indistinguishable from revelation. The line between discovery and imagination narrows until it disappears beneath ink. What cannot be disputed is the effect the map had on everyone who studied it thereafter. For cartographers, it became an invitation to humility. Even our satellites sometimes echo its mysterious alignment. For storytellers, it stood as proof that knowledge can vanish faster than ice melts, leaving only a sketch as evidence it ever existed. The idea that someone had seen Antarctica's shape before it froze alters not just geography, but chronology itself. It suggests that history, long assumed to move in straight lines, may in fact be a spiral returning to its own origins. When the map rests today in its glass case, its surface looks worn to near invisibility. Yet under soft museum light, the faded coastline still gleams, a ghost of mountains rendered in strokes of brown and green. Visitors lean close, searching for mistakes, unaware that even perfect accuracy would explain little. The parchment almost seems to breathe, as if the ink remembers winds that once swept over open water, now locked beneath endless snow. Whether the correlation is accident or revelation hardly matters anymore. The joining of myth and mathematics has already happened. The very possibility changes how we see the past. The Piri Reis map reminds us that every recorded boundary hides an older one beneath. Perhaps in some forgotten age, explorers stood at Antarctica's unfrozen shore and drew what they saw, leaving behind only this single echo to prove they were real. Centuries later, their vision resurfaced through the steady hand of an admiral. A whisper carried across empires, urging us to look again at the white bottom of the world and ask the oldest question of all. What if we are remembering, not discovering? Beneath the miles of glittering frost, beneath the silence that swallows even the wind, Antarctica burns. It is an unseen fire, slow, patient, and profoundly ancient. The continent's apparent stillness conceals a restless heartbeat of molten stone and rising gas. To the scientists who study it, this paradox of heat within ice is one of the planet's strangest contradictions, a constant reminder that even the world's coldest place never truly sleeps. To those who dream beyond science, it raises another possibility entirely. If warmth persists where no sunlight reaches, perhaps something else persists with it. Mount Erebus, perched on Ross Island, provides the most dramatic evidence of this hidden life. Its cone rises through snow like a wound that never heals, a smoking eye peering across a land of deathly white. Inside its crater churns one of Earth's few permanent lakes of lava, glowing an impossible orange against the blue of the surrounding ice. Scientists who have braved the climb speak of hearing the magma before they see it, a burbling growl echoing through vents and tunnels, the continental pulse made audible. Nearby instruments measure the constant release of heat spreading outward, melting tunnels in the glacier that twist like veins through a giant body. Erebus is only one mouth of this internal furnace, but it serves as a reminder. Antarctica's past and future are both shaped by fire. For decades, geologists assumed the rest of the continent lay dormant, its volcanic youth forgotten under eons of snow. Then, satellite radar began peering through the ice and recorded phenomena that defied assumption. Some of the thermal signatures stretched for hundreds of miles, far larger than any single volcano should create. At first, they were explained as friction from moving ice sheets, or residual heat trapped from ancient eruptions. But later readings revealed sustained warmth, not cooling embers, a continuous exhalation of energy, as if the continent were breathing. Seismic maps traced strange, circular patterns beneath the surface, and the magnetometers hummed with deviations that suggested vast metallic structures or magma plumes shallow enough to warp gravity itself. Where science pauses to analyze, imagination leaps ahead. Write heat anomaly in a research log, and the world beyond the lab will soon whisper about buried reactors, forgotten technology, or civilizations that harnessed the planet's pulse long before we named it geology. Even sober minds find it difficult not to wonder. The warmth comes from locations that align, almost teasingly, with those uncanny geometric ridges detected by radar in earlier surveys. Coincidence, most insist. But coincidences tend to accumulate in Antarctica until disbelief itself begins to shiver. Still, explanations grounded in nature are haunting enough. Under the immense weight of ice, radioactive minerals in the crust decay slowly, releasing energy that gathers in pockets, rising through cracks where the crust is thinnest. In some valleys, geothermal vents create little havens of liquid water that remain unfrozen through the darkest winters. Microbes have been found thriving in those secret pools, feeding on sulfur and mineral salts instead of light. The existence of such ecosystems, self-contained, invisible, yet enduring, suggests how life might flourish on distant frozen moons like Europa. Antarctica, for all its hostility, becomes a mirror for places beyond Earth. Each drop of warm water beneath its glaciers could be the voice of another planet speaking across the void. Yet even this wonder carries unease. Where sustainable heat exists, so too does the possibility of accelerated melting on a global scale. The same geothermal currents that sustain life also destabilize the foundations of the ice sheet. It is as though the planet keeps its contradictions close, creation and destruction beating in the same rhythm. Visitors to Erebus sometimes liken its breath to a living thing, as if the mountain itself inhales the wind and exhales a faint, bloody mist of vapor. Standing on its slope, you can feel the warm drafts curling through your boots from vents hidden under snow. The sensation is disorienting, a mingling of opposites. Fire touching ice, life kissing desolation. It makes you wonder whether this continent, so seemingly barren, is merely the surface crust of a far deeper organism, one that has been quietly alive all along. The warmth beneath the cold is more than geology. It is the pulse of Earth's memory, the proof that nothing in nature, not even the deepest freeze, can silence the heat of persistence. Far below the wind-sanded plain of the East Antarctic ice sheet, sound travels differently. Every vibration becomes a memory, every crack a century sighing. Under that colossal pressure, nearly 2 miles of frozen glass, rests a hidden sea called Lake Vostok, larger than any freshwater body in Europe and so perfectly sealed that sunlight has never touched it. The discovery of this underwater world began not with vision, but with echoes. In the 1990s, when scientists bounced radar waves into the ice, they caught a smooth reflection returning from an impossible depth, a mirror surface where rock should have been rough. It was as though the continent itself blinked. For years, the lake existed only as a rumor in data columns, a whisper of sound trapped in computers. Then, when drilling equipment finally inched its way down through layers older than the human species, pressure built to monstrous levels. If punctured too quickly, the lake could erupt like a geyser, spewing water unstirred since mastodons walked faraway continents. Engineers paused a heartbeat before breakthrough. Then, slowly, the drill breached the final barrier. What came up was unlike anything ever sampled from Earth. Water bursting upward and instantly freezing around the shaft, forming a translucent pillar captured mid-exhale. Within that frozen spray, laboratories later found fragments of life. DNA so unfamiliar, it blurred the line between microbe, animal, and myth. Thousands of sequences had no match in global databases. They seemed to belong to families that had branched away from Earth's known tree of life tens of millions of years ago, evolving beneath the ceiling of ice into biology sculpted by pressure and darkness. To scientists, it was revelation enough. To storytellers, it was invitation. If simple life endured here, why not something far more complex? Something that once remembered the day light died and the ice came down. Lake Vostok is only the largest of nearly 400 subglacial lakes stitched across Antarctica's underbelly. Some are the size of city blocks, others rival great seas. Thin rivers connect them like veins, carrying pulses of water from one to another over centuries, perhaps transporting not only sediments, but relics. Each is a world unto itself, isolated longer than any myth can measure. If a civilization existed before the freeze, its remnants may have been swallowed quietly by rising snow. Then trapped in these vaults of water, preserved the way amber keeps an insect, fragile but eternal. The mere concept unsettles the imagination. Should explorers ever lower autonomous submarines through the melt holes and into those black expanses, what would greet their lights? Schools of translucent organisms circling like living constellations? Mineral towers breathing heat from geothermal vents? Or the stony outlines of structures too symmetrical to be coincidence? Even a natural rock wall, seen through distorted sonar, could appear architectural. Yet the line between discovery and delirium grows thin when one peers into a lake that predates humanity itself. In the sterile glow of the research station above, the people who study this abyss often speak in guarded tones. They do not permit fantasy in official papers, but at night, over canned meals and thin air, speculation becomes another form of warmth. One engineer admits he sometimes feels watched when his instruments hum across those depths, as though the lake senses intrusion. Another confesses dreams of vast domes beneath the water, their surfaces aglow with trapped phosphorescence. These could be the leaking metaphors of exhaustion. But beneath Antarctica, where even microbes unknown to science flourish, realism and wonder share the same vocabulary. Every sample dredged from below arrives immaculate, sealed in crystal cylinders. The scientists lift them with gloved hands and hold them to the light. Tiny bubbles slide within like gold dust. Each one is an atmosphere from another world. If these lakes are indeed archives, they contain not merely water, but time compressed into silence. Whatever secrets they keep, genes or monuments, skeletons or stones, they rest untouched, waiting for the right question to be asked. When the drilling teams power down for the night, the ice groans softly, echoing through the metal walls like distant surf. Somewhere beneath their boots, thousands of square miles of ancient water shimmer in complete darkness. It moves slowly, brushing against mountains no human eye has seen, flowing past sediments that may hide the fingerprints of forests, animals, maybe even mines long erased from the continents above. Until those doors are opened, the lakes remain patient archivists, guarding whatever truth this frozen world still chooses to remember. The age of mystery no longer begins with sails and compasses. It begins with orbit. Far above the silent white disk of Antarctica, satellites sweep across the sky like patient scribes, their sensors peeling away the snow millimeter by millimeter in invisible light. The images they send back are monochrome poems, vast mosaics of pixelated shadows, and reflected radar signals that transform ice into code. Most of the time, the results are as expected. Abstract swirls where crevasses open, smooth fields where glaciers congeal. But one winter morning, a bank of data came through that did not behave like weather. And in that instant, the ghost of curiosity stirred again. At first, the anomaly appeared as faint bands on a radar map, a series of ruler straight lines crossing beneath the ice for distances no glacier should compose. A technician dismissed them as signal interference, the mathematical hiccups that haunt sensors over reflective terrain. Yet the lines reappeared on subsequent passes, identical in scale and orientation. They were too geometric. Nature loves curves, chance, asymmetry. This pattern whispered of intention. The program supervisors convened in a fluorescent analysis lab, eyes reddened by the screen's glow, and began adjusting filters. As noise fell away, forms rose out of the haze. Long rectangular ridges intersecting at right angles. What looked like a cluster of domes arranged in symmetrical arcs. "You're seeing artifacts," one geophysicist said, the automatic prayer of skepticism. Noise, not architecture. Yet even as he spoke, the image resolved further, sharpening into something almost architectural. A floor plan, a blueprint of stone, or ice pretending to be stone. Software that could measure proportions found repeating ratios close to the golden mean. A coincidence so statistically pure it deepened both curiosity and unease. Reports were written in language so careful it nearly erased itself. Anomalous linear features replaced structures. Unusual reflective returns substituted for walls. The findings were filed away for peer review, but curiosity leaked through the precise words. Some researchers sought explanations in geology, suggesting that tectonic compression could etch grooves into bedrock, producing lines that mimic design. Others pointed to the optical illusions created by layering radar frequencies through moving ice, imagery folding upon itself like stacked mirrors. All plausible, all unsatisfying. The geometry persisted even after the data were reprocessed by independent teams, its symmetry surviving every attempt to explain it away. Weeks became months, and the satellite constellation continued its orbital ballet, scanning from new angles. Each sweep returned fragments of clarity followed by confusion. One pass showed something like an enormous hexagon half buried under the glaciers of Coates Land. The next captured nothing but static and fractal ice. The continent seemed to toy with its watchers, offering glimpses only to snatch them back when clouds or solar interference intervened. The technicians began to joke that Antarctica was sending messages in Morse code, a pulse for every secret kept. In private, some admitted wonder. What if these patterns were imprints, foundations of an older terrain that once lay open to the sky? The idea of ancient architecture under miles of ice might have belonged to science fiction, yet the deeper they looked, the harder it became to ignore the alluring precision of those buried lines. One engineer, sleepless after his 10th consecutive shift, compared the images with infrared scans of archaeological cities buried in desert sand. The resemblance chilled him. When plotted in 3 dimensions, the radar returns traced a grid-like plateau and a cluster of elevated shapes that could not easily be written off as random. They looked like temples in negative space, the ghosts of something that once touched air before the continents rearranged themselves. Official protocol forbade imagination, but imagination ignored protocol. As word of the anomaly spread quietly through academic circles, small groups proposed unmanned probes to drill at the coordinates, to test whether these straight lines were ridges of compressed rock or hollow spaces echoing with absence. Funding for such missions vanished in bureaucracy. Antarctica keeps secrets best when hidden by cost. And so, the planet's own eyes remain its only witnesses, machines circling above, capturing fleeting hints in wavelengths invisible to human sight. When viewed frame by frame, the images flicker like an ancient film. Corners and corridors that appear, dissolve, and reappear farther along, always half obscured by interference, as if the ice itself were projecting memories for anyone patient enough to interpret them. They are neither proof nor illusion, these signals. Only the quiet argument between belief and evidence, frozen in pixels and distance. Late at night, when the final scans upload and the room falls silent, the team sometimes lets the radar sweep across Antarctica in real time. The continent glows faintly on the monitors, a white heart pulsing beneath darkness. In that moment, every straight line, every vanished dome, seems to murmur the same half-formed question that followed explorers for centuries. Are we looking at mountains born of chance, or monuments built for memory? The satellites answer only with light, and the light, as ever, refuses to explain itself. Long before telescopes and radar, stories were our first maps. Around firesides and in temple courtyards, people described edges of the world they had never touched, drawing coastlines out of words instead of ink. Across hemispheres, separated by oceans and centuries, a peculiar pattern appears in those ancient tales. Whispers of a place far to the south, a land of endless snow or blinding white stone, a realm that both beckoned and warned. Even as empires rose from deserts and jungles, this mysterious southern kingdom haunted their myths like a reflection in deep water, visible yet unreachable. Among the Maori of Aotearoa, there are chants that speak of ancestors voyaging toward the uttermost horizon, into waters where daylight faded and cold breath rose from the sea. Some versions call it Te Matau a Maui, the hook of Maui, the same mythic hero said to have pulled islands from the ocean. Yet embedded in these oral lines lies a description not of fiery origin, but of frozen discovery. Land ringed with ice, where birds fell silent and the sea hardened to crystal. Elders interpret it as metaphor for courage, but geologists notice something startlingly literal. The paths of Polynesian navigation extend farther south than previously believed, close enough that drifting icebergs might indeed have entered their sight. Half a world away, fragments of Mayan astronomy describe a white kingdom beyond the reach of the sun, a realm where the stars bend differently and time moves more slowly. Scholars have argued this was spiritual allegory, proof of their depth of imagination. Yet when those codices are compared to the star maps carved by sailors from the Mediterranean in later ages, certain coordinates converge near the southern pole's trajectory, an uncanny repetition, as though the memory of a hidden continent survived the collapse of geography itself. In Africa, old San legends tell of an ancestral exodus from a cold domain at the bottom of the world, where people spoke through water and followed fire beneath ice. The imagery is so precise that anthropologists have debated whether it echoes early migrations across an icy age, when vast glaciers reached farther north. Each culture, separated by distance, preserved some thread of direction, as if stories themselves were compasses pointing toward a truth deliberately erased by time. When archaeologists and folklorists began comparing these myths with modern maps of submerged coastlines, patterns formed like constellations across history. The narratives align along the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, the forgotten framework that once joined Africa, Australia, and Antarctica together in warm greenery. Perhaps when the first humans pushed southward thousands of generations ago, they found remnants of that lost warmth, a geologic afterimage of forests and rivers lying now beneath ice. The memory of those sites might have been carried home in story form, growing brighter instead of fading as ages passed. A culture can forget names and dates, but wonder survives like a recurring dream. Even the Greeks, whose philosophers invented the theoretical terra australis to balance the weight of northern continents, imagined it not as barren, but as noble, ruled by serene beings living in perpetual daylight. The idea filtered through medieval Europe into the compilations of scholars and mapmakers. They painted lush southern gardens guarded by serpents of snow, paradise inverted. To the logic of the time, equal were the poles of light and shade. Heaven itself required symmetry. Yet perhaps what these thinkers reinvented in mathematics was an echo of an older observation handed down in mythic disguise. When myths across continents hum the same note, coincidence feels inadequate. Some anthropologists call this convergent imagination, the tendency of the human mind to invent similar dreams when faced with similar mysteries. But another interpretation is quietly gaining voice, that oral traditions can preserve shrapnel of genuine encounters far older than writing. Memory, retold through myth, compresses truth the way ice compresses history. Under pressure, details deform but never entirely vanish. If travelers truly reached the shores of Antarctica in ages now forgotten, their stories would be all we have left. Every tale of a white kingdom or land of snow could be a reflection cast upward from a time when the polar realm was more than an abstraction. The myths endure because humans, conscious or not, recognize patterns of belonging to a world larger than our immediate borders. Whether those sung directions once guided real sails or simply dreams, they lead us back toward the same horizon where legend and geology converge, where imagination is not escape but rediscovery, and where every story told about the edge of the world might be the faint remembrance of home itself. Long before satellites mapped the shifting crust of the planet, dreamers and scholars tried to explain why the shapes of coasts seemed to echo each other across the seas. They saw Africa and South America drifting apart like halves of an ancient puzzle, noticed fossil species identical on distant continents, and concluded, without the mathematics to prove it, that the world must once have been whole and then broken. Out of that intuition rose the grandest of losses. Stories of missing continents swallowed by oceans, civilizations erased by the slow calamities of Earth's own making. Atlantis was the first and most eloquent, followed by Lemuria and Mu, a trinity of utopias buried beneath waves. When modern plate tectonics arrived to explain continental drift with scientific certainty, those myths were declared obsolete. But as it turns out, science only confirmed the grief that birthed them. The planet really does tear its own skin apart, and entire lands really have vanished. Ancient Gondwana was one such supercontinent, joined more than 500 million years ago. It collapsed gradually, continental shards migrating outward like ice floes breaking from a single frozen sea. India drifted north, crashing eventually into Asia to raise the Himalayas. Africa twisted toward the equator, while South America spun westward across widening waters. Antarctica remained at the heart of that slow storm, the sole fragment to wander so far south it found itself entombed in shadow. Once upon a time, though, its forests and wetlands touched not ice, but sunlight. Fossils pulled from the transantarctic mountains reveal leaves that belonged to giant ferns and creatures that walked between trees under warm rain. The land most people now imagine as sterile once fed rivers and hosted green abundance. In this context, the notion that some forgotten culture could have flourished upon it before the freeze does not feel mad. It feels inevitable. If humanity is hundreds of thousands of years old, that leaves vast stretches of time poorly lit by artifacts or memory. A civilization rising during one of Earth's warmer interludes could have lived and died before glaciers returned to cleanse the evidence. As the plates moved and mountains sank beneath sea level, everything built by such a people would be drawn downward, folded into the crust, buried first beneath mud and then beneath ice. It is the most perfect erasure the planet could design. Geological timelines devour history the way waves devour footprints on sand. Modern seismology detects the lingering seams of Gondwana like scars beneath Antarctica's ice. Mountains cut off mid-range, rift valleys drowned under pressure, traces of continents stitched together in secret stillness. When radar imagers map subglacial bedrock, the formations they find resemble continental relatives scattered across the southern hemisphere. There are riverbeds that mirror ancient systems in Australia, and volcanic belts aligned with those of southern Africa. The fragments fit again, just as the old myths insisted they once did. Science, unintentionally, restored the outline of what legend had been mourning all along. The thought unsettles even rational minds. It means that myth was never entirely wrong. It simply spoke another language. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. Perhaps none were single nations nor sudden catastrophes. but cultural memories inherited from deep prehistory, when people somehow intuited that the world beneath their feet was impermanent. Stories of drowned temples and sky gods rising from sinking lands could be recollections of coastlines collapsing into seismic seas as Gondwana fractured. And if the storytellers mistook geology for divine punishment, can we blame them? A continent splitting apart must have looked like the end of everything. Today, the discipline of tectonics has replaced mythology's vocabulary with subduction zones, mantle plumes, and convection currents. Yet the emotional truth remains identical. The ground moves, the past vanishes, and creation demands loss. The leftover pieces, Africa, India, Australia, South America, and Antarctica, drift still, their edges forever trying to remember the shape they once shared. In the ice, radar finds the pattern like a fingerprint left in stone. When scientists overlay those hidden ridges with the imagined maps of lost continents, the resemblance is uncomfortably precise. Nature, it seems, keeps repeating the dream of unity that humans keep retelling in myth. The ghosts of Gondwana live in our stories because they live beneath our feet, inside the very swells that push continents apart. And if somewhere within that frozen heart of the world, an echo of civilization survived, trapped in mineral or fossil or artifact, its discovery would not so much create a new legend as confirm that every legend was an imperfect memory of the planet remembering itself. If one could peel away the ice like a ceiling and look down upon Antarctica as it was 50 million years ago, the sight would defy all common sense. Instead of a barren wilderness shrouded in storm, the continent would appear lush and green, a broad plateau of emerald forests and winding rivers glinting under an amber sun. The Ross Sea, whose depths now hold only frozen silence, once opened into lagoons and freshwater deltas edged with mangroves. Mountains that now vanish beneath glaciers wore mantles of mist and moss. Valleys were thick with ferns taller than a man, and trees whose rings recorded not cold but luxuriant warmth. Fossil pollen drawn from sediments beneath that ancient seabed tells the story unmistakably. Antarctica bloomed. Those fossil grains are minute yet intoxicating tokens. Under microscopes, they reveal structures identical to species found today in temperate New Zealand and the tropical reaches of South America. Mixed among them are traces of palms and cycads, plants that cannot endure frost. Their distribution in the cores indicates entire forests once stretched from the coast to the high inland plateaus, adapting to a polar sun that never set during summer and disappeared completely in winter. Imagine trees evolving not to sleep through cold, but through darkness, converting faint twilight into energy, thriving through long seasons of gentle warmth. Scientists now believe carbon dioxide levels then were triple current concentrations, trapping heat and transforming the Southern Ocean into a thermal reservoir. Warm currents circled the planet unhindered, feeding humidity into Antarctic skies. Rain fell instead of snow. Rivers braided through lowlands that are now entombed under miles of ice. Lakes teemed with fish, and flightless birds larger than penguins waddled through reed-lined shallows. In the leaf beds and silt, there is evidence of burrowing mammals, tiny marsupials whose descendants still hop through Australian bush. Life was plentiful, and the continent felt alive in a way inconceivable today. The dream shatters when one considers what ended it. Around 34 million years ago, tectonic isolation and changes in atmospheric chemistry drew curtains of cold across the poles. Ocean currents were diverted, ice sheets bloomed, and within a geological instant, forests collapsed into tundra, then tundra into lifeless vacuum. But the transition was not uniform. Pockets of lingering warmth may have survived for millennia, refuges where species clung until the last thaw faded. Did anything higher-minded, anything capable of perception beyond instinct, share that fading paradise? In scientific circles, the question is almost unaskable, yet whispers persist. Fossilized wood from the Antarctic mountains bears scars that resemble tool marks rather than natural breaks. Minerals within certain petrified logs show signs of heating inconsistent with volcanic activity. Natural explanations abound: pressure fracturing, lightning strikes, but none satisfy completely. The notion that intelligent beings emerged on that fertile Antarctica, only to vanish when the chill came, remains tempting precisely because it sits just outside the borders of provable. Some suggest instead that intelligence did not arise there but visited. During that greenhouse epoch, the planet's configuration made Antarctica a gateway between emerging continents. To a civilization capable of long oceanic voyages, its warm harbors would have been beacons under endless daylight. A polar summer paradise at the roof of the world. If travelers came, they left little behind, save perhaps the faint geomagnetic disruptions buried under the ice. Patterns that modern instruments still puzzle over. Whether natural crustal shifts or echoes of something crafted, these traces whisper of activity at odds with the narrative of desolation. In the laboratory, each new pollen grain retrieved from sediment becomes an argument between time and memory. They prove that tropical heat once flowed where now only blizzards reign, that Earth has worn many faces, and that life adapts like a patient sculptor. Around those cores and fossils lingers an atmosphere of reverence, a sense that the planet is not merely ancient, but layered with forgotten epochs of beauty and terror. Standing over the microscope's lens, a researcher described the moment as hearing the Earth breathe in color. Perhaps within that breath were voices too, silenced beneath the sudden snows. Whatever intelligence once walked Antarctic forests, whether beast, visitor, or merely nature's potential unrealized, its traces are diffused now into the ice. Still, knowing that rivers once shimmered under a midnight sun reminds us that the line between miracle and fossil record is impossibly thin. The continent's buried warmth is a memory that refuses to die, and every snowflake falling today lands on a surface that once glowed with green. Antarctica was alive once, and perhaps, deep beneath, its heartbeat continues, steady as the planet's own pulse waiting to be heard again when the ice finally releases its grip. The story of Antarctica is often told through light and cold, but deep beneath that glittering stillness, it is magnetism that trembles. Even when compasses refuse to spin, even when storms erase direction, the invisible field surrounding our planet hums through stone and air, a colossal heartbeat guiding everything with iron in its veins. When scientists began charting that magnetic breath across Antarctica, they expected monotony, steady gradients of polarity shaped by buried rock. Instead, they found music, wild and unpredictable, full of strange notes echoing from underneath the ice. The first distortions appeared decades ago as aircraft equipped with magnetometers crisscrossed the continent, tracing invisible topography beneath the snow. Over the Wilkes Land region, instruments went wild, recording a dip in magnetic strength so vast it defied logic. Subsequent passes revealed a roughly circular anomaly more than 200 miles wide, as though a colossal pit of metal lay hidden under 2 miles of ice. Some attributed it to a buried meteorite, an echo of ancient impact powerful enough to have shaken the planet during the Permian extinction. Others argued it could be volcanic ore, dense with iron and nickel trapped since Gondwana's shattering. Yet even those explanations seemed stretched thin when data from satellites later revealed neighboring zones that bent the planet's magnetic lines into elaborate spirals, orderly where nature prefers chaos. Behind the scenes, debate burned as fiercely as the winds outside the research stations. Physics tends to demand humility, yet every reading seemed to invite arrogance, the hope that humans had stumbled upon something unprecedented. Either the scar of a catastrophe we barely survived, or traces of intention larger than ourselves. If an impact, then it was one strong enough to carve a new climate and perhaps set in motion the continental drift that led Antarctica southward into night. But if not an impact, if those magnetic rings represented the ghosts of geometric structures aligned with planetary forces, then history's boundaries would need rewriting. When teams on the ground dragged their sensors across miles of empty plain, they felt that tension between proof and dream. Each swing of the magnetometer needle could mean a mineral vein or the wall of something no pickaxe would ever touch. At night, staring at the jittering graphs, researchers confessed a strange sensation. The anomalies almost felt responsive, like whispers returning their call. Rational minds dismissed such impressions as the fatigue of monotony, yet still the unease lingered. There is something unnervingly intimate about magnetism. It reaches through skin and instrument alike, tugging at the iron inside our blood. The continent, they said half-jokingly, seemed to feel us back. As the mapping grew more refined, a larger picture began to emerge. A pattern like the spiral of a galaxy frozen into the crust. It extended from the transantarctic mountains to the eastern plateau, ribbons of reversed polarity weaving across hundreds of miles. That complexity stunned geologists. It spoke of processes deliberate in appearance, yet natural in cause. Molten rock cooling amid shifting poles, frozen mid-reversal millions of years ago. Still, the shape's precision provoked further intrigue. Some formations resonated with geometric alignment found in human architecture, prompting inevitable murmurs of design. Science officially remained silent on such musings, but unofficially the conversations went where data could not follow. The imagination, after all, is magnetic too. It swings toward questions the way a compass swings toward north, and when placed beside a mystery strong enough, it trembles. Whether the anomalies mark a meteor's grave, an ancient iron mountain, or something our vocabulary cannot yet phrase, they possess a gravitational charm that no one who has witnessed them can fully escape. Even the skeptical allow that strange beauty exists in these invisible maps etched beneath the polar crown, patterns that draw human curiosity as surely as the poles draw the planet's field. When storms sweep over the research domes and light curtains ripple across the sky, the aurora dances in sympathy with those buried shapes, as if sky and earth are closing a circuit. Scientists stand outside in the freezing air, their instruments humming softly, watching curtains of green fire twist above the white world. In those moments, it feels as though the entire continent is alive with polarity, magnetism whispering its secrets through stone and ice. Whatever lies beneath remains undefined, but the field it casts is irresistible, pulling at needles, at hearts, at everything that dares to listen. The story of the 1947 expedition begins, as many such stories do, with inspiration disguised as routine. The men of the Polar Meteorological Service left from Hobart aboard a converted whaling ship named the Nereid, bound for Queen Maud Land. Officially, their mission was benign, to study auroral activity and magnetic phenomena in the high atmosphere, part of a post-war campaign to map the ionosphere. In reality, the documents they carried bore several seals, scientific, naval, and something classified simply as civilian liaison, a cryptic authority that no one on board quite understood. The journals of their leader, meteorologist Dr. Elias Riefenstahl, reveal a man convinced that the skies concealed messages, yet uncoded, that the pulses of light above the poles were the language of the Earth itself. By mid-December, the team had established a base camp between two mountain ridges, now buried beneath a field of ice. Their reports during the first weeks were routine: barometric readings, wind speeds, magnetometer measurements. The tone of the transcripts changed suddenly on January 8th, when radio operator Anders noted interference not from weather, but from steady harmonic noise, a rhythmic pulse cutting through static at 20-minute intervals. At first, they assumed an equipment fault. Yet, when they adjusted frequencies, the pattern followed them. Elias wrote in the log that it sounded like counting, like breath made metal. On January 10th, the team reported a glow over the southern horizon, faint and green, unlike the aurora they had come to study. Two men trekked 5 miles to photograph it and never returned. Their search party found only tracks that ended abruptly in smooth ice, as though polished clean, their snow shovels standing upright like markers left by uncertain hands. No distress signals were heard. Before static swallowed the radio, Anders' last recorded words were simple and brittle. "They're coming back, but without sound." The fragments that survive after that date arrive mostly from a backup radio link accidentally left recording in Hobart. The transmission is scratchy, voices clear only in fragments, phrases like triangular shadows, cannot tell distance, light under us. Then sudden silence, broken by the grinding shriek of metal, and a long, hollow tone that fades into open static. The final transmission occurred 20 minutes later from coordinates marking a zone now under permanent research restriction. The message ends mid-sentence. "If anyone hears, tell them the ground is moved." When a rescue fleet arrived weeks later, they found the Nereid frozen into the shore ice, hatches open, supplies untouched. Inside the radio cabin, the equipment was intact but powered down, switches deliberately set to neutral. No bodies, no signs of struggle, only a faint burn mark on the floor shaped like a ring, as though something circular and hot had rested there briefly. Crates of geological samples had vanished, along with the film reels from their cameras. A single notebook lay on a bunk under a damp blanket. Its last entry, written in hurried script, read, "The ice isn't answering anymore." Official statements attributed the loss to weather, though no storms were recorded along their route. Privately, other scientists whispered theories: ice collapse, magnetic disturbance, or classified experiments gone wrong. Decades later, satellite images of the area revealed strange linear formations, but government regulators quickly labeled the location off-limits due to environmental instability. Files concerning the expedition were sealed for 50 years. When they finally surfaced, entire pages were redacted. Today at the National Archive, the surviving documents rest inside temperature-controlled cabinets, their paper brittle as dried leaves. Reading them, one feels a strange intimacy with ghosts. People who stepped into the foggy white and simply did not return. Each neatly typed coordinate, each clipped sentence, carries the weight of obsession, curiosity, and something unspoken. Were they swallowed by ice or secrecy? Did they stumble upon a discovery their world wasn't ready to confront? In an age addicted to proof, their absence stands as its own testimony. The vagar missing are often louder than the found. And sometimes a vanishing is not failure, but the final act of knowledge too extraordinary to survive disclosure. Ice, for all its silence, is restless. forever cracking, shifting, breathing. It does not entomb the past so much as store it like film held in cold storage, waiting for warmth to flicker the real to life again. When glaciologists speak of Antarctica as a time machine, they are not being poetic. Each melting layer exposes an older surface below it, a sequence reversed from normal history. The further the retreat, the deeper into prehistory we peer. It means that climate change, catastrophic in one sense, also doubles as revelation. The planet tears the veils from its own face, whether we are ready or not. Consider Greenland, where within a single human lifetime, glaciers have drawn back miles, revealing valleys and fjords hidden for millennia. In places, mosses long presumed extinct have revived from dormancy, taking color again under the thin northern sun. At the edges of the inland ice sheet, the ground releases not only plant matter, but wooden fragments. Roots and branches from forests that grew when humans still painted cave walls. The scientists who handle them do so with reverence, gloved hands trembling, aware that these objects bridge two climates, two eras. They call them resurrections. If Greenland is resurrection, Antarctica is apocalypse and Genesis combined. Should its ice one day yield to heat, it would not melt evenly. Pockets would collapse first, revealing basins larger than nations, descending into canyons now measured only by radar. Glaciologists already trace the outlines of these ghost valleys. They know where rivers once ran, where sediments lie packed like scrolls. For now, the continent guards them under armor, but the armor thins year by year. Half a century of higher global temperature could expose its uppermost secrets, and another 100 may bare its heart. What humanity would find then is the question that keeps researchers awake on cold nights. Would we face a landscape of sterile stone, or the unmistakable geometry of intention? A pattern that cannot be shaped by wind or water alone. Even the most rational scientists know how tempting that fantasy is. To imagine explorers standing at the rim of a newly slumped valley and gazing upon the roof of an ancient structure, frost glinting off arch or dome, is almost irresistible. Still, whether the shapes prove natural or artificial might matter less than what they reveal about the continuity of creation itself. The instant the ice retreats, the geological record becomes a mirror for ourselves. We measure our own impermanence by the outlines that return to light, by the carvings, natural or human, the planet preserved without consent. In the field stations ringing the Ross ice shelf, researchers sometimes joke that they are custodians of a museum whose exhibits are yet to be unwrapped. Their laughter fades quickly when storms rise, because every gust reminds them that the museum is melting while they watch. In cores drilled deep into the ancient ice, thin seams of volcanic ash mark the ages like punctuation. The deeper layers, perfectly compacted, whisper of forests, of freshwater lakes, of eras warmer than today. Some hold strange chemical signatures, residues of metals and compounds that do not belong to natural cycles, hints of activity preceding recorded history. Each new exposure from melting promises more such curiosities. When the ice dissolves, it does not simply uncover, it rewrites. Rivers will resume old courses, dust will settle on ground unseen for tens of millions of years, and forgotten winds will breathe again across buried mountains. Films of water will crawl down the slopes where glaciers once had their grip, feeding microbial life that reawakens after eons of sleep. An entire biosphere sealed away could bloom anew, a rebirth so dramatic that it would erase the boundary between discovery and invention. In that vision of the future, one part dread, one part awe, the ice is both destroyer and archivist. It holds the memory of sunlight, the rumor of civilizations, and the blueprints of climate still to come. When it finally steps aside, mankind will look not merely upon the planet's past, but upon its reflection, a portrait of what happens when warmth becomes revelation. Ice is never a tomb. It is a curtain drawn tight over a stage still humming with life. And the play beneath has only paused. When the drilling rig over Lake Mercer first broke through solid ice into liquid darkness, the scientists standing around it held their breath as if opening a tomb. Pressurized water gushed up and froze instantly around the borehole, a sculpted plume suspended in midair. It looked like clear glass rising from the ice itself, but within that glass slept worlds. Samples were sealed in sterile canisters and rushed to laboratories thousands of miles away, where careful thawing and analysis would span months. No one expected to find anything remarkable. The purpose had been to study sediment flow and climate history. But nature, unpredictable as memory, had other plans. Under microscopes in a windowless room in Colorado, a young microbiologist named Ayla keyed in a genetic sequence she assumed would match some extremophile bacteria common to cold water. The computer took longer than usual to respond, its algorithm searching larger and larger databases until eventually it listed comparisons not to bacteria, but to marine invertebrates extinct since the Eocene epoch. She thought the software had erred, yet repetition yielded the same result. Embedded within the DNA fragments were stretches of genes nearly identical to those of organisms that had not swum in any ocean for 40 million years. The discovery spread quietly through the research network like an electric whisper. Subsequent sequencing from other labs confirmed it. The microbial population of Lake Mercer, sustained without light or atmosphere, carried genetic echoes of creatures that once populated our planet's ancient seas. Some genes coded for bioluminescence, others for shells composed of minerals foreign to freshwater environments. It was as if the lake retained within its microbes the memory of the ocean that had covered the land before ice claimed it. Each microorganism functioned like a living artifact, a cell-sized reliquary holding patterns from a world long erased. The conscious mind scratches for explanations when confronted with impossibility. One theory proposed molecular fossils, snippets of old DNA frozen in permafrost and later taken up by modern microbes as raw material for survival. Another suggested that remnants of seawater trapped when the continent froze had carried ancient life inward, preserving its molecular record. But even these ideas struggled to explain the intact precision of the sequences. Evolution erases nearly everything it touches. Yet here were codes that seemed untouched, as if something had tended them, copying them generation after generation without deviation. Ayla spent nights staring at the digital renderings of those spirals of code glowing on her monitor, feeling as though she were reading messages rather than molecules. When she fed the data through sound mapping software just to visualize the sequences, the patterns generated tones that formed harmonic intervals, eerie, musical repetitions suggesting rhythm. It was coincidence, of course, data behaving like art. Still, the effect was hypnotic. Hidden songs of microorganisms humming a melody older than humankind. Among the research team, a speculative question began to circulate quietly, almost guiltily. Could these microbes be not only survivors, but stewards of information? Living storage devices cultivated intentionally in some forgotten age. The thought grazed the borders of credibility. Yet even the most skeptical admitted that biology contains mysteries indistinguishable from design. A tree memorizes sunlight in its rings. Coral spells centuries of temperature in its skeleton. Why could not a microbe remember an ocean that shaped it? passing that memory forward cell by cell until the present day. Press conferences avoided such philosophy, speaking instead of horizontal gene transfer and legacy isotopes. But privately, within the hum of centrifuges and refrigeration units, curiosity took a more poetic turn. Scientists began referring to the organisms as microbes of memory. Each drop of lake water became a miniature archive, every cluster of DNA letters a stanza from the planet's secret autobiography. Some samples even contained fragments that resisted sequencing altogether, compounds that broke down only under specific wavelengths of ultraviolet light, reactions implying biochemical systems that no longer exist on Earth's surface. Those who handled the samples say a faint scent clung to them, not metallic like most cold water, but faintly sweet, like algae warmed by sun. That phantom aroma haunted dreams, a sensory echo from a vanished sea. It reminded researchers that the line between the living and the remembered is not fixed. Existence can persist as data, as code, as possibility. In the grand scheme of the continent's mysteries, microbes might seem the smallest of players, yet they are its most eloquent storytellers. They prove that life does not surrender to time, but mutates into remembrance. Whether they're ancient genes or chance fossils or messages left behind will matter less than what they tell us about resilience. Even in a world sealed under ice, life keeps writing, quietly, invisibly, recording the pulse of epochs, waiting through silence for the moment when someone learns again to read its code. Beneath Antarctica's endless white horizon, the ice is never quiet. It moves in minute increments, grinding over stone, cracking under its own weight, releasing vibrations too low for human ears to register. To glaciologists, this invisible orchestra is a source of constant fascination. They plant geophones deep into boreholes and listen to the continent breathe. What the devices capture often sounds like music created by gravity itself, a ceaseless harmony of pressure and resonance, as though the ice sheet were a living instrument tuned by the planet's slowest rhythms. One night at McMurdo Station, technician Leo Harcourt replayed a recording from a new sensor array planted near the Foundation ice stream. Through the headphones came the expected roars and sighs of shifting glaciers, then a long, continuous hum at 18 hertz, eerily steady, unwavering for hours. He assumed feedback. Yet when he compared data from other stations hundreds of kilometers apart, the same tone was present everywhere, pulsing with mathematical precision. Its interval matched no known seismic event, and meteorological conditions were calm. When slowed down and amplified, the note took on uncanny texture, a deep throbbing that rose and fell like breath drawn through pipes of crystal. News spread through the research community, and soon analysis teams joined in. Some labeled it the polar choir, and for a time they treated it as a curiosity of resonance. Ice under enormous pressure can act as a semi-transparent conductor, channeling vibration through networks of long, column-shaped crystals. Each crystal refracts sound differently, producing echoes that can stack into harmonic layers. But the behavior of the 18 Hz signal defied this randomness. It repeated every 108 minutes, a period so precise it reminded some of orbital mechanics, as if the tone were responding not to geology, but to something revolving above or within the Earth. Engineers simulated glacier stress under identical pressures, generating test tones with powerful subwoofers. The results produced irregular, fading patterns. The recorded hum, however, remained immaculate. When plotted as waveform against time, it displayed fractal symmetry, miniature replicas of its larger shape nested infinitely inside itself. That elegance left even skeptics unsettled. Nature is beautiful, yes, but such order felt purposeful. There were, of course, prosaic proposals. Some blamed interference from faraway submarines, though signal strength persisted even through the continent's interior, far beyond any oceanic influence. Others suspected experimental communication systems bouncing waves off the ionosphere. Official statements leaned heavily on those explanations, yet offered little verification. Meanwhile, veteran field researchers continued hearing soft tremors in the ice, sometimes while simply walking across it, vibrations rising through their boots, faint but felt in the bones. "It's talking again," one muttered over the radio during a resupply mission. "Same pitch as last night." When audio specialists filtered the frequencies into the audible range, the translation was haunting. Gentle oscillations, like a massive glass organ played by invisible hands. Yet beneath the melody lay whispering overtones, elusive as words half-formed. The human brain, ever hungry for pattern, tried to decode meaning in the cadence. Some swore they could distinguish syllables repeating at long intervals, ancient phonemes not belonging to any language catalog today. The transcripts were inconclusive, though they gave birth to tales that spread through the polar stations like frost through a window pane. Isla, the microbiologist from the Lake Mercer project, listened to one recording while analyzing microbial DNA sequences that also revealed rhythmic intervals. She noticed that the intervals of the vibration matched patterns in her genetic data. A coincidence, most likely, but impossible to ignore. It seemed as though sound and life itself were following the same forgotten algorithm. Outside, the sky shimmered with green aurora, the same wavelength once thought to confuse magnetic sensors. Some researchers stepped out into the cold, microphones in hand, recording the air. They could not feel the vibration anymore, yet the equipment still caught it, humming softly across empty plains. The sound was neither earthquake nor atmosphere, but something older, resonating through the continent's crystalline heart. Whether the whispering crystals merely sang the physics of their own pressure or echoed an ancient design woven into the very structure of ice, remains unprovable. Yet those who have heard the recordings speak of an unease difficult to articulate, a sensation that the sound recognizes its listeners, adjusting subtly as they lean closer. In those vibrations, Antarctica does what it has always done best: blur the line between the mechanical and the miraculous, turning even silence into question and every hum into a word we have forgotten how to translate. Deep beneath the continent's center, unseen peaks thrust toward a sky sealed in ice, their summits sharper than any alpine ridge, and their valleys buried under 2 miles of frozen weight. The Gamburtsev Mountains, as they are known from radar tracings, stretch for hundreds of miles across East Antarctica's underworld. No explorer has stood upon them. No sunlight has touched their faces in tens of millions of years. To scientists, they represent one of Earth's strangest paradoxes. A mountain range as imposing as the Alps, yet invisible, secreted away in a darkness colder than outer space. The first glimpse came during the International Geophysical Year of 1958, when Soviet researchers flying seismic surveys over the interior expected to find a flat, featureless crust. What returned instead were echoes bouncing off colossal slopes and jagged ridges hidden beneath the ice cap's core. Decades later, improved radar imaging sharpened the picture. Graceful valleys branching in perfect dendritic patterns, plateaus wide enough to hold lakes, and plain-like basins that looked startlingly smooth, almost landscaped. The revelation unsettled even the most pragmatic geologists. The region appeared too symmetrical, too preserved. In theory, mountains that old should have eroded long ago. Only constant cold and pressure could have kept them untouched. an accidental cryogenic preservation of an entire topography. In meeting rooms back home, the images projected onto white screens felt unreal. A grayscale X-ray of another Earth layered beneath our own. Some compared it to looking through time, the terrain echoing ranges on continents thousands of miles away, as though Antarctica remembered what it once was before exile to the pole. A few couldn't resist bolder speculation. The valleys formed perfect corridors. The plateaus mirrored geometric regularities of design. Could they have once held rivers, forests, or even structures? No one said the word city aloud at first. Yet it hovered in the air like condensation in the cold. Economists and militaries saw opportunity. A perfectly shielded vault of minerals, perhaps even water. While historians pondered myth, recalling tales of hidden realms beneath glaciers, worlds that slumber until the stars align. The data could support either dream. Some peaks rose individually, needle-thin, matching profiles of volcanic spires, but others clustered in symmetrical groups forming hexagonal basins. Nature, of course, crafts her own precision. Basalt columns, salt flats, coral reefs, all perfect orders of chance. But the resemblance to human intention teased the imagination. To test the terrain's depths, engineers sent radar pulses at different wavelengths, hoping to discern the density of what lay between ice and stone. They found regions of anomalous reflectivity, zones where the signals bounced back brighter, as if striking pockets of air or strangely uniform material. Interpretations varied. Caves filled with frozen vapor, or perhaps ancient cavities carved by subglacial rivers. When pressure maps revealed temperature variations suggesting geothermal warmth below certain peaks, excitement flared. A warm source under that much ice could host liquid spaces, possibly entire hidden lakes or domes untouched for eons. Scientists dreamed of robotic submersibles navigating those voids, cameras lighting worlds unseen since the dinosaurs. Dreamers saw cathedral chambers sheltering relics of impossible antiquity. Isla, returning from the Lake Mercer project, viewed the data sets late one night in a darkened lab. She traced the valleys with trembling fingers across the glowing screen, and thought of riverbeds elsewhere that had cradled civilization. Something about the smooth curvature of one basin reminded her of aerial maps of ancient Mesopotamian plains. She knew it was coincidence, yet felt a distinct vertigo, a sense of recognition from someone else's memory. Perhaps the Earth holds memory just as microbes do, preserving pattern beyond comprehension. When she presented her findings among colleagues, debate erupted, half scientific, half philosophical. One geologist argued that the mountains were relics of tectonic uplift that predated even Gondwana, sculpted and then locked in permafrost. Another wondered aloud whether these mountains might mark the bedrock remnants of an earlier landmass now erased. If life ever touched those valleys before the freeze, he said quietly, its traces may still rest there. In the stillness of Antarctica, such musings seem less extravagant. Beneath the ice, entropy is slowed to reverence. The Gomburtsevs lie preserved not as ruins, but as possibilities. A portrait of the Earth before it chose to forget itself. Whether they were once mere stone or the foundation of something built remains a question whispered among those who study the continent's underworld. The shape of the range, elegant yet unnatural, sustains two equal faiths: that geology can explain everything, or that some landscapes are carved by the hands of memory itself. When the sun sinks beneath the horizon in Antarctica, it does not return for months. Darkness swallows everything, landscape and sky merging into one continuous void. For those who live there now, the arrival of polar night is both ritual and trial. Clocks lose meaning, meals blur into one another, and time begins to fold like fabric. The only constant is the wind and the low hum of generators guarding fragile warmth. Under that endless night, the scientists stationed on the ice feel something ancient stir within them. A primal awareness of solitude so deep it becomes a kind of communion with the planet itself. Inside research bunkers, light is rationed carefully. Bulbs burn dimly to preserve power, bathing faces in soft amber and turning every shadow into velvet. People talk quietly, as if afraid to disturb the hush outside, where temperature plunges so low that breathing unprotected would crystallize air within the lungs. Beyond the perimeter, the sky transforms into a black ocean veined with currents of green aurora, silent ribbons that swirl as if the heavens were remembering how to speak. Some researchers venture out at scheduled intervals to read instruments or recalibrate sensors, tethered by lines of rope to ensure safe return. They describe the sensation of the night pressing against their bodies, soundless yet immense, a living thing made of absence. Darkness in such proportions reshapes perception. After weeks, the mind forgets what daylight means, and colors begin to vanish from memory. Even dreams lighten their palette until they too become monochrome. In this deprivation, discovery often arrives unbidden. Deprived of sight, hearing grows acute. Vibrations through the ice take on tone and texture, forming an unearthly music. Some nights the earth itself seems to pulse with a low, steady resonance, as if echoing the earlier whispers from the crystals deep below. The scientists record these sounds out of habit, but a few admit privately that the act feels devotional, as though the darkness is teaching them to listen rather than to look. What would it have meant to earlier beings, if any existed here, to face such a season? Imagining sentient life in an age before the freeze invites the question, how would it survive without a sun to guide it? Perhaps warmth came not from the sky, but from the earth. Geothermal vents glowing beneath thin crusts of frost, serving as the heart fires of an ancient ecosystem. In the perpetual twilight, luminescent organisms could have flourished, painting the landscape with soft radiance. One can almost conjure the image. Forests of phosphorescent moss illuminating rivers that steamed gently above thermal springs, creatures navigating by bioluminescent patterns instead of stars. Where the world refused light, life may have generated its own. Modern humans rely on diesel generators and LED strips to replace the sun. Yet even here, shadows hold dominion. Those who endure multiple winters under such conditions sometimes speak of flickers at the edge of vision, the phantom glow of something moving just beyond the reach of headlamps. Logically, they are reflections, tricks of refraction caused by minute ice particles. Still, a strange comfort arises in believing that the dark might be inhabited, that the long night shelters watchers, ancient or new, bound by the same curiosity that drives human exploration. Isla, lying awake in her bunk, often imagines what it would be like to inhabit this realm not as a visitor, but as part of its rhythm. To shed dependency on sunlight entirely and live instead by geothermal warmth and memory. She pictures intelligence evolved under permanent night, perceiving through sound, heat, and magnetism rather than through eyes. Such beings, if they ever lived, would have known truths hidden to bright worlds, how to sense without seeing, how to navigate absence as presence. When morning finally breaks, months later, the light returns quietly, diffused and weak, as if uncertain of its welcome. Researchers crawl from their stations blinking, their senses overwhelmed by color resurrected in the sky. Yet somewhere beneath that revived glow, the ice still keeps its secret night, vast and unbroken. the lessons it teaches remain. That illumination is not the same as understanding, and that sometimes the surest path to knowledge lies in learning to see without light. The first time the microphones were lowered into the crevasse, the scientists expected simple static, pops and groans of ice under strain. Instead, they heard voices. Not words exactly, but something uncannily rhythmic. Rising tones, pauses, quivering vowels shaped by pressure and distance. For hours, the recorders captured a language born of tension, water, and air. When the data was converted into sound waves and played through loudspeakers in the lab, it filled the room with a chorus like whales calling through glass. Some laughed uneasily, others checked the equipment for malfunction. But when they compared it to real-time seismic events, every fluctuation matched a fracture in the glacier. The continent was, quite literally, speaking through its wounds. The field of cryoacoustics, listening to ice, has become the discipline of patient translators. Each crack and rumble tells of pressure building or air escaping, of water surging through hidden tunnels. Sound travels 4 times faster through ice than through air, which makes it a precision instrument for mapping change. Yet the human ear detects something more in the recordings. A haunting suggestion of articulation. When spectrographs translate the noises into visual patterns, curved shapes emerge that mimic speech cadences, consonants, and elongated syllables that seem too deliberate for coincidence. Rational minds insist these are products of physics. Delayed echoes, harmonics, compressed jets of air snapping through crystalline corridors. But poets among the researchers lean closer and whisper that maybe physics itself is fluent in poetry. As global temperatures climb, there are more such eruptions than ever before. Ice shelves once stable for centuries now groan like ships straining against their moorings. The Larsen Sea Shelf emits a continuous low-frequency roar that vibrates through hundreds of miles, an unending bass note of dissolution. Hydrophones stationed beneath its edge pick up complex modulations, grinding crescendos followed by sharp sighs that fade into bubbles. Some sections even pulse in repeating patterns, a slow heartbeat measurable but not visible. When accelerated into audible range, the effect is mesmerizing. To those who work among it, these sounds are both data and requiem, a soundtrack to the planet remembering its instability. Isla, reviewing the recordings late one evening, wondered if the ice might be telling its own version of history. Every crack, each slide of pressure, seemed situated with intention, as if recounting the trauma of freezing, the memory of forests buried beneath. She isolated one segment captured near an under-ice canyon and slowed it down by 10 times. What emerged was an almost melodic phrase, a cascading swell, then a sudden stop, followed by a tiny descending tone that faded into silence. Listening in the dim light of the lab, she felt an inexplicable sorrow, as though something vast was trying to form syllables, but collapsing back into water before it could make itself understood. Scientists fighting to remain objective use the same words, despite themselves. The ice sounds distressed, they said. It cries out, it sighs, it remembers. Every effort to remove emotion from the analysis failed because humans instinctively translate resonance into feeling. When we hear noise repeating with rhythm, our minds insist on intention. And why not? Nature was our first teacher in this. Thunder as anger, wind as whisper, waves as pulse. Antarctica, shedding its casino of white, wails more convincingly than any storm-racked sea. There are still physical explanations to ground the wonder. Trapped gases bursting free as layers soften, pressure gradients producing infrasound, water vapor freezing and exploding in caverns. Yet even these mechanics, have the structure of a voice box. The glacier draws breath, holds it for centuries, and exhales climate itself into the air. The continent may not think, but it remembers in vibration. Its sentences are cycles of melt and refreeze, its punctuation the calving of icebergs. When the recordings are played in flight over the continent itself, the sound merges with the real hum outside, an enormous duet of past and present. For the lucky few who've heard it unfiltered, it feels like standing within a cathedral built entirely of moving glass. The echoes rise, intertwine, and vanish, leaving only trembling in the air. They say you don't need translation to understand what it means. The meaning sits below language, the simple truth of a planet trying, after too long a silence, to make itself heard again. The maps of Antarctica look straightforward at first. Lines of latitude, flags of science stations, a maze of glaciers and bays labeled with careful neutrality. But study them closely, and questions start to form. Patches of featureless white stretch where satellite imagery elsewhere shows detail down to the shape of shadows. Coordinates vanish into fog. Some of these omissions are accidental, the result of cloud or data overlap. But others are deliberate, gray rectangles imposed by human decisions. Even in a land governed by peace treaties, secrecy flickers like static behind the clarity of snow. Officially, these forbidden zones exist for safety or environmental protection. Unofficially, they glow like beacons to curiosity. The largest of them lies near the southwest pole of inaccessibility, a place so remote that the nearest coast is more than 1,000 miles away. The records say the ice there is unstable, riddled with fissures, and too dangerous for expeditions. Yet 20th century flight logs reveal that aircraft once landed in that exact region repeatedly during the Cold War, unloading cargo whose manifests remain classified. The equipment had something to do with magnetism and weather, perhaps, though the surviving paperwork reads like riddles. Decades later, when high-resolution satellites began covering the globe, images over those coordinates arrived blurred, as if the lens had been brushed by frost only on that square of sky. Scientists shrug. Digital stitching errors, they say. But quiet conversations in the canteens of McMurdo and Concordia tell of colleagues whose proposals to sample those coordinates were politely declined without explanation. People laugh off the rumors at first. The hidden base, the buried artifact, the ancient reactor humming beneath miles of ice. But the laughter sounds thin. Everyone at the bottom of the world knows that mystery has gravity. The more you deny it, the stronger its pull. Ayla experienced that magnetism herself when she requested drilling rights near one of the restricted zones to study geothermal vents. The application returned, stamped in red. Declined pending review. No reason. No timeline. She reread the page in disbelief. Her research could have helped understand the melting foundations beneath the ice sheet. But policy had the final word. Later, a veteran glaciologist advised her quietly to let the subject rest. Some things down there are older than our need to measure them, he said. He smiled as if joking, but his eyes looked afraid of their own memory. There are explanations so reasonable, they are almost disappointing. Certain valleys shelter ecosystems so delicate that human presence would collapse them in days. Some regions cover meteorite fields subject to international protection. Others hide research equipment monitoring atmospheric radiation, installations whose locations are kept secret to avoid tampering. But these sensible reasons cannot erase the romance of the unknown. The very word restricted works like a spell, conjuring the silhouettes of things not meant for us to see. The blurred rectangles on digital maps have become modern hieroglyphs. Internet forums analyze pixel color and speculate about excavation sites or alien relics. Amateur cartographers overlay different epochs of data, tracing where glaciers may conceal geothermal anomalies or symmetrical structures first glimpsed by satellite radar. Governments respond with silence, and silence, invariably, sounds like confirmation. Somewhere inside this dance of curiosity and denial, Antarctica transforms from a real place into a mirror reflecting our own obsession with secrets. Behind every locked coordinate might rest nothing more than lethal terrain or simply human bureaucracy. Yet the idea persists that what is hidden may be significant not in scale, but in implication. A truth unready for the daylight. Perhaps the forbidden zones care nothing for human politics at all. Perhaps what they protect is time itself, keeping intact whatever stories lay buried beneath the veils of ice and confidentiality. And maybe those blurred squares are not censorship but mercy, a gesture preventing us from opening every door at once. Still, every explorer knows that the truest map of Antarctica is unfinished. Across an expanse wider than imagination lies a handful of coordinates inked out, whispering to cartographers like sirens beneath frozen seas. Within those unseen reaches might wait only silence, or something that still hums faintly in the cold. Proof that even at the farthest corner of the earth, mystery is the most renewable resource we possess. The fossils first emerged from the ice like whispers from a forgotten garden. A team of paleontologists working far inland at Beardmore Glacier uncovered a ridge of dark rock exposed by recent melt. Embedded within its surface were shapes unmistakably biological. Trunks of trees, their grain preserved in gleaming stone, and nearby the twisted impressions of leaves so delicate that frost crystals had to be brushed away with sable brushes. Wood had no right to exist this close to the South Pole, let alone wood that had once belonged to a rainforest species. The nearest living relatives of those plants thrived in equatorial humidity, a continent and a climate away. As samples were mapped and chiseled free, the strangeness deepened. Many logs retained clear growth rings, suggesting not frantic seasonal extremes, but steady light and moisture through the year. Conditions of persistent warmth. In the same layers, the team found bones, vertebrae of amphibians large as crocodiles, their imprints surrounded by silty sediment more typical of river deltas than glaciers. The fossils were so finely detailed that skin textures and capillary ridges could still be discerned. Each fragment carried the smell of ancient mud, as if the earth itself exhaled a memory. The paleontologists called the site the Impossible Forest. They assembled a picture of an Antarctica swathed in green, drenched by monsoon rains, a land of lakes feeding into inland seas. Fossil pollen hinted at cicads, ginkgo, and flowering plants coexisting, species that should have been separated by eras. Nature seemed to have compressed time into one exuberant experiment. And among the amber and bark impressions, tiny carvings appeared, no larger than seashells but geometrically regular, arranged along what had been root channels. At first, skeptic minds dismissed them as crystal formations. Yet, scanning electron microscopes revealed grooves spaced with micrometric precision, a symmetry that challenged easy dismissal. If the marks were coincidental, coincidence had an oddly artistic hand. In the camp tent at midnight, heated by a single lamp, the scientists debated between data and wonder. Maybe lightning, one offered. Or mineral veins, said another. Isla, now consulting for the project, traced one carving pattern with a gloved finger and murmured that it resembled not ornament, but computation, like tally marks or sequences. The silence that followed was uneasy, half thrilled, half afraid. Scientists prefer anomalies to mysteries. Anomalies yield eventually to logic. But the fossils felt like defiance itself, refusing to fit inside any known timeline. Weeks later, the team unearthed the preserved outline of a tropical amphibian, its elongated limbs frozen mid-stride, its bones mineralized into mosaics of iron oxide. Inside, residue analysis found not freshwater signatures, but traces of saline chemistry. That suggested it had lived where coastal oceans met rivers. A reminder that the mountains, where it now lay buried, had once edged sunny shores. The discovery proved more than diversity. It illustrated desperation. Life had clung to this place, even as climate swayed between extremes, adapting with startling agility. When the world tilted toward cold, entire ecosystems migrated or transformed rather than vanish. The vitality of that age was beyond anything modern biodiversity has achieved. Later, in the Institute's laboratory thousands of miles away, the fossils stood upright under sterile light. The petrified trunks radiated an iridescent sheen, their mineral veins catching color like oil on water. Some specimens emitted faint electromagnetic signatures. Remnants of iron crystallization, the engineers said. Others joked they pulsed like heartbeats when the room fell silent. Visitors stared through glass and realized that these stones, though lifeless, possessed the presence of living things. They were messages written in the grammar of geology, proving that heat and time can preserve more than shape. They can keep an echo of vitality. Whether or not the symmetrical marks mean intelligence remains unresolved. Yet the discovery changed the tone of Antarctic research completely. The continent was no longer just an archive of extinction, but a testament to resilience. It showed that life had not merely survived here. It had thrived, diversified, and perhaps observed itself with something approaching awareness. Standing before the fossils, Isla felt she could almost hear the timeless amphibians stirring in their stone cages, their petrified lungs filled again with the breath of possibility. All around them, the ice hummed softly, as though the ancient forest still sang beneath the suffocating white, waiting for the sun to return. When the images arrived at the analysis center in Wellington, the technicians at first thought they were looking at calibration errors. Across hundreds of kilometers of East Antarctica, newly processed satellite data revealed vast, straight depressions running parallel for miles, intersecting at regular angles. The lines were faint, but too coherent to be natural fractures. They formed grids, some circular clusters, others perfect. Rectangular corridors aligned almost exactly to the cardinal directions. Within these patterns, smaller indentations appeared, each equidistant, as if representing foundations or pillars. The researchers labeled them anomalous linear features, the same neutral phrase used for the unexplainable since radar was invented. Yet the longer the experts studied the images, the stranger they became. Engineers from several universities quickly reproduced the phenomenon using mathematical models. Certain radar frequencies, interacting with dense internal layers of ice, can mimic geometry when refracted through crystallized faults. A computer might interpret these echoes as depth changes, mirages born of interference rather than real structures. The explanation was elegant, logical, and slightly disappointing. Still, as more satellites passed over the same coordinates, the patterns persisted even when variables were adjusted. Nature's symmetry may be capable of wonders, but this looked deliberate, almost planned. Skepticism remained fierce. Geologists reminded everyone that glaciers carve along weaknesses in the rock, sometimes tracing patterns that by chance imitate human order. Pressure ridges can run parallel like roadways, and when captured at low resolution, the illusion intensifies. But others noticed the lines continued seamlessly across geological boundaries, as though ignoring the natural topography beneath. In the era before mystery could easily be dismissed with technology, such discoveries would have been heralded as proof of the impossible. Now they were filed under "requires further investigation," bureaucratic wording that hides excitement like a pulse beneath ice. Isla reviewed the data on her monitor weeks later. She adjusted filters, merging satellite imagery with seismic readings from nearby posts, layering sound over sight. As the radar signal became audible, a soft oscillation emerged, resonating along the same paths as the depressions. Each line seemed to carry its own frequency, collectively forming a harmonic grid. Linking visual and acoustic data was unusual procedure. Yet the coincidence was undeniable. She caught her reflection in the glass of the screen, realizing she was looking at two mysteries speaking the same language. One of shape, the other of sound. Word spread between institutes, attracting voices from outside conventional science. Historians recalled myths describing stone roads under glass seas, legends of routes cut to preserve migration across a world overwhelmed by floods. Mathematicians compared the Antarctic formations to the sacred geometries repeating through civilizations millennia apart. The golden spirals of temples, the orthogonal layouts of lost cities buried under desert. Anthropologists pointed out how such intuition might be instinctual, the brain imposing order on chaos to comfort itself. Perhaps these shapes inside the ice were not remnants of a forgotten culture, but reflections of our own hunger for pattern. Glacial Rorschach tests magnifying the mind's desire to find meaning. Yet late one night, an engineer from a private imaging firm uploaded enhanced renderings to a restricted server. In his composite, the lines converged into a grid so precise that one corridor measured exactly 300 meters across throughout its length, with 90-degree junctions recurring at mathematical intervals. The measurements were too perfect for glacier flow, which always bends under stress. "Natural processes hate right angles," he muttered to himself before deleting the file at dawn. But copies had already circulated. When asked for comment, government agencies issued the usual assurances. The data reflected known geological phenomena. Still, several coordinates were quietly recategorized as research-controlled zones. The act itself spoke louder than the explanation. Considering the evidence, Isla refused certainty. She knew how easily wonder can warp fact, how stories cling to every unsolved detail like frost to a window pane. And yet, looking over those spectral grids, she felt an echo of footsteps, perhaps not human as we understand them, but purposeful motion recorded by the earth itself. Whether carved by intelligence or coincidence scarcely mattered. The implication was the same. The ice remembered direction. Something once moved with intent across this continent long before we arrived to question it. And its paths, preserved in the deepest layers, traced not just geography, but the very outline of curiosity itself. Human history is stitched together not only by ruins and bones, but by stories that refuse to fade. Myths, told again and again around the warmth of firelight, carry patterns as persistent as any genetic code. Across continents that never met, cultures spoke of teachers arriving from the Great White South. A direction few had ever traveled, yet one that loomed large in imagination. To the Sumerians, they were winged beings who came down from the House of the North Wind, bringing language and geometry. In the Andean highlands, legends remembered Viracocha, a pale traveler emerging from foaming seas at the world's frozen edge, bearing knowledge of agriculture and stars. Polynesian chants told of ancestors descending from a long-lost land of light that slipped beneath waves of ice. Even the Egyptians, whose deserts burn under merciless sun, depicted deities crowned with feathers of frost, steering boats along celestial currents flowing toward the southern horizon. Over centuries, these stories splintered into religion, allegory, and art. Scholars learned to treat them as symbols of rebirth or natural cycles. Few dared to take them literally. Myth is comfortable when disarmed by metaphor. Yet, every so often a pattern reasserts itself so clearly that even rational minds feel a tremor of curiosity. The recurring direction, the idea that wisdom originated from the coldest reach of Earth, never quite goes away. If civilization flowered somewhere far older and farther south than recorded history grants, its echoes would likely reach us first in story, not in stone. Isla spent sleepless nights reading translations of ancient tablets and codices, comparing their imagery to the map of ice buried beneath her data screens. The coincidences were uncanny. The Sumerian term for the domain of the gods, Abzu, literally meant the deep water or abyss at the base of the world. Petroglyphs in Bolivia showed visitors surrounded by halos of flame, or perhaps of light, refracted through atmospheric ice. A pattern emerged. Contact not from the sky exactly, but from a place described as brilliant, cold, and luminous. A southern paradise lost to flood or flame. The literary language of antiquity knew no vocabulary for pole and glacier. So the memory transformed across tongues into symbols of fire descending from heaven. The anthropologist in her fought the notion. Migration myths often invert geography, and metaphors travel easier than people. Still, she could not dismiss the peculiar unity. Could these accounts encode ancestral memory? A whispered remembrance of encounters tens of thousands of years in the past, when a warm Antarctica still crowned the south and seafarers or nomads ventured outward from it after the world froze. Genetic data places humanity's dispersal through countless migrations. Scattered survivors would carry fragments of their homeland wherever they settled, dressing memory in divine metaphor. Perhaps gods were simply people transfigured by time. Archaeologists, wary of romantic speculation, keep language of miracles out of journals. Yet they will admit quietly that myth often hides reliable geography. Flood stories coincide with known glacial melt events. Tales of fire raining from the sky match volcanic cataclysms or asteroid strikes. Myths may not tell us what happened, but they tell us that it happened, preserving direction when detail fades. Each generation translates catastrophe into narrative therapy, and across that translation, something authentic endures. A remarkable find deepened the debate. In the highlands of Ethiopia, a tablet once dismissed as ornamental turned out to bear a star map of the southern hemisphere. Plotted with accuracy impossible for that era's instruments. The most brilliant point on the inscription was not a star, but a mark placed almost exactly where Antarctica would appear on modern projections. Scholars called it coincidence. Others called it confession. For Ayla, now accustomed to living among scientific ghosts, the convergence of myth and measurement felt less like proof than resonance. Stories, she decided, are instruments much like the ice itself. They reverberate when struck by truth, even if they no longer know the melody. When she dreamt of her southern continent, she pictured not extraterrestrial engineers or divine benefactors, but ordinary beings bearing torches of knowledge across frozen seas, desperate to keep memory alive. The myths we inherit are their faint lights, flickering through time, teaching us to look south not for gods, but for the origins of human wonder. The signs of the great catastrophe were discovered not in shattered monuments or burnt ruins, but in layers of mud entombed far below the current glaciers. Drilling teams searching for ancient ice caught an unexpected composition. Wild alternations of silt and volcanic glass, boundaries so abrupt they could have formed only through disaster. Carbon shards rested beside marine plankton, while above them sediment hardened into solid ice. The evidence spoke like testimony. An ocean flood followed by a flash freeze, sudden and absolute, as though the planet inhaled and never exhaled again. Geological dating placed the event around 12 million years ago, long after the first freezing but long before the world we inhabit took shape. Something extraordinary had melted the continent and then refrozen it in a single violent breath. In the control labs, models ran through possibilities. Volcanoes could have done it, erupting beneath the ice and turning kilometers of water into clouds of steam. Yet even the known giants of the Ross Range were too small to melt whole basins at once. A meteor strike might explain it, a hot stone from space hammering the crust until it bled. But no crater of the needed scale had ever been found. The most intriguing readings came from the depths of Wilkes Land, where gravity anomalies hinted at a buried impact basin roughly the right age. If a meteor had indeed fallen there, it would have unleashed energy equal to millions of nuclear detonations, liquefying oceans, shattering skies, and producing rains of ash that darkened sunlight for centuries. Beneath such chaos, the thriving green world of ancient Antarctica would have vanished almost overnight. Isla studied the strata lined out on her monitor. Chaos followed by calm. Between them lay a band of fine, crystalline dust, unlike any natural formation she knew. It shimmered even under artificial light, particles aligning along invisible lines of magnetism like filings drawn to an unseen lodestone. The composition told a story of intense heat, tempered by sudden cold. Minerals foamed into glass and then sealed in an instant of perfect stasis. She imagined how it must have looked. The forests steaming into clouds, rivers boiling into vacancy, the atmosphere lit with fires that soon collapsed into ice storms. The planet could do this without warning, rewriting itself faster than any species could comprehend. The idea of life persisting after such an event seemed almost impossible. And yet, life always had a habit of clinging to cracks. Some researchers speculated that microorganisms in geothermal refuges survived the annihilation, repopulating once the skies cleared. Others, more daring, wondered if intelligence of some kind might have foreseen the calamity and taken shelter below ground. The network of valleys under the Gamburtsev Mountains, warm with geothermal heat, could have provided sanctuary. Had anyone lived to endure the storm, their refuge would now be crushed under 2 miles of frozen time, their voices imprisoned in ice awaiting accidental resurrection. In her notes, Isla wrote, "If consciousness had existed there, the freeze would have been mercy. Not extinction, but suspension." She wasn't alone in that thought. The older geologists at the station, pragmatic men, sometimes fell silent when discussing the event, as if secretly grieving an unnamed loss. She understood. To realize that entire landscapes could be transformed in a blink was to feel one's own fragility. Perhaps what frightened them was not the violence of the catastrophe, but its silence. A world could die quietly, each leaf turning to glass, each drop of water freezing before it could fall. Satellite images still show the echoes of that moment. Buried rivers trace collapsed deltas beneath today's glaciers, and radar burns reveal symmetrical scars carved into bedrock. Whatever force triggered the Great Melt, it did not simply reshape a continent. It rebooted the planet's climate. The next epoch began in shivering stillness, a monument of white concealing the art and grief of what came before. Every catastrophe births memory. The cataclysm that struck Antarctica wrote its autobiography in stone, glass, and silence, preserving what it destroyed. Centuries later, as humans listen to the whispers of melting ice, they are hearing the final chapter of that ancient upheaval. The echo of valleys that once breathed, swallowed by crystallized sky, waiting to finish the sentence the world never let them speak. When linguists began comparing fragments of ancient languages separated by seas and ages, they expected the usual coincidences: shared roots born from trade, borrowed words carried along old migration routes. What they didn't expect were symbols. Carved in stone and pressed into clay across continents, clusters of marks appeared again and again. Spirals, long arcs, small dots arranged like constellations curving toward the southern sky. On Mesopotamian tablets, those dots framed the god's descent. In Polynesian petroglyphs, they marked a navigation route. On Egyptian ceilings, they shimmered as star maps leading beyond the horizon. The shapes seemed to speak a shared ancestral memory. And curiously, they matched not the northern constellations familiar to those cultures, but formations seen only from latitudes far to the south. The ice, it seemed, remembered names, and the echoes of those lost syllables had rippled through civilization ever since. Isla examined digital overlays, combining images from museums around the world. When aligned, the symbols connected cleanly into the pattern of the southern sky as it would have appeared over Antarctica before the last shift of Earth's axis. The very same coordinates corresponded to the magnetic anomalies she had studied months earlier. She felt vertigo, as though a curtain had pulled back between eras. If survivors of the great cataclysm had fled northward, carrying fragments of their astronomy, they might have taught others to see the heavens through their memory of the southern stars. Over generations, those charts became myth. Gods sailing across frozen seas, teachers descending from bright constellations. Mythologists have long suspected that stories of lost paradises, Atlantis, Mu, the White Kingdom, are cultural fossils of migration. Each new homeland needs a forgotten homeland to make it sacred. If there once was a civilization in the lush Antarctic of prehistory, its exodus could have sculpted the world's spiritual map. The Atlanteans of Plato's age might have been echoes of exiles passed through millennia of retelling, transformed from refugees into demigods. The directions fit. Legends place their island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules, toward the open sea and the encircling ocean. Beyond that, far south, waits the hidden continent that until recent centuries no one believed existed. Archaeologists stay wary of romantic invention. Yet even their caution concedes pattern. In Peru, the Nazca lines shape animals visible only from the air. But one additional figure, a perfect grid of triangles, mirrors the geometric depression discovered under Antarctic ice. In ancient Polynesian chants, sailors describe a motherland, drowned in snow that gave birth to navigators who mastered the stars. And among Egyptians, the priests of Heliopolis spoke of a bright island of the horizon that perished when the sun turned away in anger. Every story points southward, every map bends toward a whitened sea. No artifact can yet prove the connection because the ice still holds its archive out of reach. But languages remember stubbornly. Words like Atla, Tanis, Tani, found from Finnish folktales to Mayan inscriptions, derive from a root signifying edge, island, or southern home. It is the sound of distance turned into prayer. Listening to those syllables spoken aloud, Isla felt a shiver of recognition, not rational, but ancestral, as though human speech itself carried a record of migration, encoded deep within tone and rhythm. She entertained possibilities carefully, balancing science and wonder like weights on a scale. Perhaps the southern survivors were few, explorers turned wayfarers, carrying star lore and stories northward. Their children would repeat those tales until the icebound origin blurred into heaven itself. Memory erodes slowly. First, geography dissolves, then time, leaving only narrative. In that sense, all myths are survivors, stripped of body but clutching the soul of what they once described. In the evenings, when auroras flickered beyond the research windows, Ayla whispered the old names to herself. Atal, Tani, Atara, listening to how they rolled from her tongue like water over stone. She wondered if sound itself could awaken recognition in whatever intelligence once watched those same skies from warmer Antarctic shores. If the ice truly remembers, perhaps it waits for its own language to return to it. For someone to pronounce again the words that once mapped the heavens upon its surface. And maybe that is what myth has always tried to do. Not invent origins, but remind the world, softly and endlessly, of where its heart first began to beat. No discovery is ever purely scientific once it begins to alter the story we tell about ourselves. Antarctica, more than any place on Earth, sits at that intersection where curiosity meets control. Each expedition that ventures into its interior publishes open data for the world's researchers. Yet behind those public graphs and photographs runs another network, a lattice of encrypted transmissions shared only with defense agencies and approved contractors. The justification is always the same: logistics, safety, coordination. But within the pattern of silence that follows certain findings, Ayla could feel the nervous pulse of something else. Knowledge, once considered universal, was becoming proprietary. When the latest series of radar satellites began mapping the interior at unprecedented resolution, the results were transmitted directly to a joint archive administered by the consortium of nations governing the Antarctic Treaty. Within weeks, several data caches were withdrawn for technical review. When they reappeared, sections of the readings, especially around known anomaly zones, were mysteriously absent, scrubbed as if by digital snowfall. The omissions were too deliberate to be accidents. Engineers called it adaptive filtering, a security mechanism blanking any feature that resembled engineered geometry. To Ayla, it felt like a pre-programmed erasure designed to blind the very technologies built for revelation. Confronting her supervisor yielded only polite diplomacy. "We cooperate with multiple agencies," he said, "each with their own thresholds for public release." Translation: the satellites belong to us all, and therefore to no one. Which means whoever can claim jurisdiction over secrecy controls the narrative. The logic was familiar. Transparency championed in speeches, but sacrificed quietly in practice. Antarctica's ice, once shield for ecosystems, had become geopolitical armor. Rumors circulated of a private venture funded by defense contracts operating under the guise of climate surveillance. Their aircraft flew patterns inconsistent with weather study, overlapping areas of the famous blurred coordinates. When questioned, officials answered in placeholder sentences about magnetic calibration. Meanwhile, a few independent scientists noticed subtle distortions in the reissued imagery, tiny discontinuities in the uniform whiteness, like seams barely stitched. To the casual observer, they were pixels. To those who had seen the unfiltered data, they were erased valleys, perhaps even structures. At a conference in Geneva, Ayla presented her findings on geothermal heat anomalies and mentioned, almost casually, evidence suggesting interference from encrypted frequencies around restricted zones. The room stiffened. Later, 2 delegates approached her privately urging discretion. "These readings cross into classified territory," one warned. "Continuation could violate the treaty's security provisions." She thanked them politely but couldn't ignore the irony. A treaty founded to preserve peace and transparency now guarded information behind walls of silence thicker than the ice itself. Back at her station, she reran her models offline, disconnected from shared servers. The patterns emerging looked disturbingly architectural. She recorded notes, but shared nothing publicly, aware that ownership of discovery would decide its fate. If genuine traces of a pre-human civilization existed beneath the polar ice, to whom would they belong? To humanity as heritage, or to the institutions that could reach them first and patent their meaning? The question itself felt radioactive. History offered precedent. Ancient scrolls locked in monasteries, the Dead Sea texts withheld for decades, archaeological sites fenced by armies, all examples of discovery turned into currency. Revelation, Isla realized, is rarely the first casualty of secrecy. Transparency is. The same engines that promise enlightenment often forge new shadows. One evening, alone in the lab, she played the recordings of the whispering crystals, the low hum once dismissed as natural resonance. For the first time, she thought she recognized a rhythm in it. Not language exactly, but cadence, like breathing slowed. She imagined those frequencies pulsing beneath the continents, indifferent to politics and data rights, waiting for a listener unafraid of consequence. The ice had no allegiance, only memory, and memory resists control. Whatever secrets Antarctica hides will someday surface, because ice eventually melts, and truth, even when redacted, seeps through the cracks. But as Ayla considered the administrative screens before her, passwords, clearance codes, digital curtains, she wondered which barrier would give way first. The frozen crust of the planet, or the colder crust of human secrecy. And whether, when the truth finally thawed, anyone would have the courage to share what they found. The change began almost invisibly, degrees adding themselves like forgotten debts. Year after year, the ice thinned a little more, calving into the sea in fragments the size of cities. What once took millennia now happened within a single generation. Satellite footage showed Antarctica losing mass like breath on a mirror. Where glaciers had marched unbroken from horizon to horizon, dark veins of water now glistened, widening into rivers beneath the sun. Research outposts that once stood atop stable shelves had to be relocated, foundations sinking into slush. The planet was waking, and its heartbeat, long muffled, could at last be heard. Isla remained at the forefront, now leading a multinational team whose task was to study accelerating melt zones. Officially, their mission was climate modeling. Yet every member understood the subtext. Curiosity sharpened by the growing belief that the thaw might reveal whatever stories the ice had hidden. Drone footage captured rectangular shadows beneath newly exposed ice cliffs, patterns at once geological and wrong, edges too deliberate. The sensors detected metallic elements where none should exist. Every season brought new anomalies, and with each year of melting, the plausible became probable. What had been speculation was turning, drip by melting drip, into archaeology. The team deployed autonomous submersibles into melt lakes dark as spilled ink. Cameras scanned through turbid water and caught glimpses of columns rising from sediment, their surfaces encrusted with mineral frost. Were they natural basalt formations, or something less accidental? Data streams poured in faster than interpretations could keep pace. The images leaked sooner than expected. Blurry captures ricocheted across news networks until the world watched in collective disbelief. Governments issued caution, calling them optical illusions born of trapping layers. But the public knew the language of evasion. By then, everyone was listening for the moment when the ice might confess. Storms increased as if in protest, winds screaming across the peninsula with the ancient wrath of continents rearranging themselves. Isla watched from the command dome as lightning flashed over the horizon, illuminating skyscraper walls of partially collapsed glacier. Each collapse exposed darker material beneath, compressed rock and what appeared, though it was scientifically indefensible to say so, as fragments of constructed geometry. The excitement was tempered by a quiet, ethical unease. If these pieces were the remains of something intelligent, was it right to disturb them? The ice had acted as custodian for millions of years, sealing its cargo not out of cruelty, but out of necessity, like a planet's immune response to memory too dangerous to keep breathing. International councils began drafting emergency protocols for heritage zones in regions newly accessible by meltwater. Yet defining heritage for potential non-human creators proved impossible. Religious leaders surged into debate, proclaiming prophecy fulfilled or blasphemy confirmed. Economies sniffed opportunity in metals and minerals of impossible age. Science, for all its instruments, found itself unprepared for the simplest moral question. Once uncovered, can a secret ever be reburied? Isla walked among the melt channels one twilight, the sun an ember trembling on the rim of the world. She could hear water running under her feet like veins thawing from a stone heart. Suddenly she understood that the return of warmth was not merely a climatic cycle, but a kind of resurrection, the planet exhaling one deep, dangerous breath after an eon of silence. To dig too hungrily might awaken wounds sealed for our sake. Yet not to look would be denial itself, another kind of death. She felt humanity poised between reverence and greed, incapable of choosing, certain only that both paths led forward into revelation. Eventually, the ice would relinquish everything. Forests, fossils, the long-buried bones of myth. And perhaps, among them, the unmistakable proof that we were not the first to call this planet home. The warmth returning to Antarctica was both gift and warning. It asked whether a species addicted to discovery could also learn to listen, to treat the opening Earth not as a conquest, but as a confession. The coming century would decide whether we emerged wiser from the thaw or were consumed by it, leaving behind, for whoever follows, new ruins waiting once again to freeze. At first, the discovery seemed like a laboratory glitch, one of those statistical hiccups that vanish under recalculation. A team sequencing the DNA of extremophiles taken from newly thawed Antarctic lakes noticed fragments of genetic code that looked oddly familiar. When the data was compared to existing databases, sections aligned not just with bacteria, but with the genomes of higher organisms, mollusks, insects, even small mammals. The matches were faint, just a few repeating motifs hidden inside vast deserts of code. Yet the resemblance was steady across samples. The odds of such repetition occurring by chance were infinitesimal. That could mean contamination or something far older threading through life like a forgotten refrain. Ayla received the files 2 days after they were reported. Her eyes followed the printouts like staves of music. The patterns pulsed with rhythm, the same 3-note motif appearing in species that had shared no habitat for millions of years. The team cross-checked for error, cleansing data, even re-extracting DNA from ice that had not touched human hands since the lake was sealed. Still, the echoes persisted. The code seemed to know the melody by heart, as if all living things remembered a song they no longer knew they were singing. The hypothesis that arose on every tongue was almost heretical. a southern ancestor. If some cradle species had once evolved in the warmth of prehistoric Antarctica, its molecular blueprints may have diffused throughout the biosphere before the freeze. The cataclysm would have erased the visible lineage, leaving behind only ghost signatures passed down through migration and mutation. Life's family tree, once thought to root firmly in equatorial oceans, might instead spread downward into a frozen trunk. The South, paradoxically, could have been the birthplace of diversification. Skeptics were quick to protest. Similar gene sequences can emerge through convergent evolution. DNA is efficient, bound to recycle workable solutions across species. Yet Isla couldn't ignore the precision of the repetition. The Antarctic genomes carried not just bits of similarity, but identical errors. Small, silent mutations nested in the same positions. Coincidences don't replicate mistakes across eons. It hinted that somewhere in the planet's deep past, cold and warm realms alike had whispered through the same ancestral throat. When the sequences were modeled into proteins, the computer generated shapes resembling double helices folded into intricate knots, structures designed for resilience under pressure. These molecules could survive extremes beyond what modern biology predicts. Perfect templates for persistence in an environment of freezing cycles. If such architecture originated in Antarctica's old warmth, it may have provided the seed of adaptation that allowed future species to conquer the world's most hostile places. The entire narrative of evolution tilted slightly, pointing its compass southward. The findings shook the conventions of paleogenetics. If the genes were truly ancient echoes, they predated recognizable species by tens of millions of years. A fossil record might be irrelevant. The evidence was written inside every living cell. One could trace memory not through stones, but through the body itself. Life remembered its vanished continent in the twists of its syntax, carrying that inheritance invisibly. At conferences, arguments flared hotter than the experimental burners in their labs. Was it reckless to rewrite the story of life on circumstantial code? Or equally reckless not to believe what the data suggested? Ayla, sitting in the back rows, realized the debate mattered less than what it implied. Regardless of proof, humanity was beginning to see itself as participant in a memory broader than its own species. A lineage that might have begun under the lost green canopy of a southern world, before ice erased the page. Late that night, she loaded the Antarctic code into an algorithm designed to convert genetic sequences into tones. The pattern unfolded through the speakers as tangled choral music of data, harmonies looping, soft and infinite. For a moment, she felt that the entire living world was breathing in rhythm with it. From microbes to humans, an ancient harmony rising again from the cold. Evolution, she thought, was less a tree than an echo expanding through time. And somewhere inside us all, perhaps, the South still sings. The more Ayla studied the ice, the more it began to resemble a mirror. Every measurement, every revelation about ancient warmth or buried ruin, threw her own time into sharp relief. History was not a linear ascent, but a spiral, its revolutions marked by catastrophe and renewal. She thought of the endless Antarctic landscape. Once a forest, then an ocean, now a frozen monument. Nothing, not even the continent itself, had escaped transformation. The lesson could not have been clearer. Permanence is a myth humanity tells itself to soften the edges of mortality. Everything melts, even certainty. Each layer of the planet's memory whispered the same refrain. The Carnian storms had drowned ecosystems only to seed the rise of dinosaurs. Their extinction, in turn, had cleared the stage for mammals. Every collapse was invitation, every ruin a blueprint for something else to grow. Ayla realized that the Earth's apparent cruelty was in fact its method of endurance. It survives by relinquishing what refuses to change. In this way, destruction and creation are the same gesture. One hand sweeping away the old painting, the other preparing the canvas for the next. Increasingly, she felt the present aligning with those ancient pulses. The world outside was warming at a rate unseen in any geological epoch save the great cataclysms. Floods reshaped shorelines, cities cracked under drought, and coral kingdoms faded into silence. Watching ice shelves shear apart on live satellite feed gave her a sense of déjà vu. The planet reciting an old story in a new script. Millions of years apart, the pattern remained constant. It was as though Earth itself had rhythms deeper than civilization, a breathing measured in epochs rather than years. During one particularly long night, Ayla found herself imagining the future long after humanity's own page had flipped. Perhaps new intelligences would roam these continents, reading our ruins as we now read the fossils of creatures that had never dreamed of us. They would find rusted satellites in orbit and wonder what sky-born gods had set them there. Even ice might return, reclaiming the warmed world in an inversion of mercy. What humans call progress might one day be studied as sediment, a brief glitter between long ages of quiet. She felt no despair in that thought. Instead, an odd gratitude bloomed. To belong to a planet capable of renewal meant being part of something vast enough to outlive failure. We are the atmosphere, learning to know itself, she thought. And awareness is only ever temporary. The tragedy lies not in impermanence, but in our refusal to see its grace. The fossils beneath her feet were not eulogies, but reminders that life, by disappearing, makes room for the next miracle. Ayla began writing a different kind of report, not meant for peer review, but for anyone willing to listen. In it, she wove scientific data through personal reflection. How continents drift like slow thoughts. How even the hardest stone carries the memory of fluid magma. How extinction is rarely final, but instead a transformation of energy. The essay spread quietly online, translated into dozens of languages. She was startled to learn where it traveled: classrooms, protests, family dinner tables. Readers said it helped them understand that planetary rescue was not about freezing time, but guiding change with humility, like sailors adjusting course to wind rather than cursing the storm. In the end, she returned to the polar plateau one final time. Standing alone on a ridge above a valley veined with meltwater, she watched the light slide across ice that had outlasted empires and prophets alike. The horizon trembled with heat mirage shimmer, a visual warning that the age of crystallized silence was ending. And yet, within that thawing lay possibility. To melt is not always to vanish. Sometimes it is to take new shape. The continent had borne forests, glaciers, and ghosts, and it would bear something else when this cycle turned again. For the first time, she felt the weight of truth settling gently rather than crushingly. The understanding that impermanence is not the enemy of beauty, but its secret architect, and that nothing truly dies in a world where even the ice remembers how to sing. The first tremors were so faint that only the most attentive instruments noticed them. A low, continuous vibration pulsing through the continent's spine. The geophones scattered across Antarctica translated the movement into electronic whispers that merged into one word: awakening. For decades, the interior had been quiet, its volcanic heart sealed beneath kilometers of glacial pressure. Now, for the first time in recorded memory, magma appeared to be rising through chambers long dormant. The continent was doing what all sleeping creatures eventually do. It was shifting in its rest, stretching against its icy restraint. Isla stood in the control dome as data streamed across glowing monitors. Red dots bloomed across her maps like early embers of a fire under snow, each pulse synchronized with faint topographical distortion. Sensors near the Gamburtsev range detected heat fluxes that should have been impossible, while satellites registered subtle bulging of the ice sheet. A slow inhale. At first, she wanted to call it coincidence, the ordinary restlessness of the Earth's crust. But as the days passed, the pattern stabilized into rhythm, deep and insistent. Beneath the coldest place on the planet, something was stirring, rewriting its own silence. The news drew journalists and theologians before it drew more scientists. If magma flowed freely again, the planet's thermostat would rise faster than any computer model predicted. But people seemed less concerned about climate models than about what might surface. Every conversation spun toward the mythic, the lost valleys re-emerging, the rumored cities exhumed by fire instead of thaw. It was as though humanity, frightened by what it had done to the planet, secretly wanted something older to wake and remind it of proportion. Hope and dread knotted together into collective fascination. Along the seismic network, Ayla's team debated responsibility. Should they welcome this new knowledge or shield it, as their predecessors once tried to do? Any excavation could accelerate instability. Even a drill might open veins of hidden heat. Yet refusing to look felt equally dangerous, a denial of kinship with the past. Some argued for unfiltered transparency, let everyone see the truth as it unfolds. Others warned that exposure without understanding would feed chaos, repeating the moral error of turning discovery into spectacle. Ayla, caught between them, thought of the ice as a wound, one that human curiosity might either heal by knowledge or worsen through impatience. At night, the tremors manifested as sound. The microphones left over from the cryoacoustic experiments captured tones too deep for ordinary hearing. But when sped up for analysis, they resembled a steady heartbeat layered with occasional flares, what she called glacial syllables. She lay awake listening to them through the headphones, feeling as though the continent was trying to translate itself into our frequency. Each pulse was warm, almost compassionate, a reminder that Earth is not inert but responsive. She imagined that within those vibrations lay memory. The forests, the oceans, the vanished creatures, all whispering together in magma's language. Governments announced joint scientific missions, their rhetoric oscillating between reverence and control. While they planned, the ice continued to melt, revealing veins of black volcanic glass and steaming fissures that laced the horizon like scars. Drone cameras captured scenes that defied composure. Rivers running red-orange under the aurora, plumes of vapor twisting up to merge with celestial lights. The imagery flooded the public consciousness, awakening awe that felt nearly religious. A planet once viewed as background had stepped forward as protagonist, demanding attention not through calamity, but through sheer astonishment. Ayla watched as the world argued over meaning. Some saw apocalypse, others rebirth. To her, it simply felt personal. The Earth was no longer content to be studied. It wanted dialogue. The white continent, after eons of silence, was speaking again through vibration and heat, calling its distant children back to listen. What would happen when its voice grew stronger, when glaciers split open and revealed exactly what had been entombed? She didn't know, only that she felt both the excitement of discovery and the humility of confession. As magma brewed beneath her feet, she realized the awakening of Antarctica was also the awakening of every mind willing to face its reflection. In its shifting ice and trembling bones, the planet held a mirror. And somewhere beneath the steam of revelation, humanity's own eyes began slowly to open. When at last the tremors subsided and the continent entered an uneasy calm, a strange stillness fell across the world. Satellites no longer showed flashes of heat under the glaciers, and the constant low vibration faded back into the quiet hum of wind. Humanity exhaled as though the planet itself had unclenched a fist. Research stations opened their shutters to pale sunlight that painted the snow in bands of gold. In that luminous calm, Ayla found she could finally think beyond the data, beyond the politics and the fever of speculation. The noise of discovery had exhausted itself, leaving only the question that started it all. What does it mean to know? She walked out onto the plateau one evening when the sky blazed with aurora. Curtains of green and violet rippled against the stars. And for an instant, she imagined she was standing inside the pulse of the universe, the ice beneath her glowing like a mirror for heaven. Somewhere down there, beneath miles of compressed water, lay everything the world had fought about for centuries: proof or legend, structure or stone. Yet as she looked across the silver horizon, it no longer mattered whether civilization had truly existed below. What mattered was the realization that human curiosity itself had become a form of archaeology, unearthing not fossils, but the layers of its own longing. The act of searching was the very artifact she had been meant to find. Across the planet, people had begun to shift their gaze from proof to awe. The melting still continued, slower now but unstoppable. And wherever ice receded, new landscapes appeared: green valleys, silent lakes, fields littered with whispering fossils. No ancient city emerged shining from the cold. Yet every rock carried a presence, as if shaped by unseen intention. Museums filled with the spoils of revelation. Stones etched by wind, microorganisms older than language, minerals fused in cataclysm. Visitors filed past the displays in reverent silence, sensing that the line between natural and sacred had thinned. Even absence gleamed with meaning. Ayla's team published their final report, careful to label every wonder with humility. The paper contained no grand conclusions, only an admission that discovery is never completion. It is invitation. They ended with a single sentence that would be quoted for years. The earth keeps secrets not to hide them, but to teach us how to look. Afterward, Ayla lingered alone in the south for months. She recorded the sounds of meltwater running under the ice, threading them with the earlier songs of the whispering crystals. Played together, they formed a polyphony of opposites, one voice rising, another dissolving. To her, it sounded like a farewell between epochs, the planet composing its own requiem and prelude in the same breath. Each evening she looked toward the constellations, trying to imagine what Earth might look like from their height. The aurora bent across the sky like veins of living light, and she thought of all the civilizations that had come and gone under those same stars. Perhaps they too had stood in awe of the heavens, believing the cosmos to be permanent. They were wrong, of course, nothing is. But their imagining had carved meaning into time. And that meaning was still here, flickering above the white expanse. The stars themselves were the final archive, holding within their slow fire the memory of every world that ever dreamed of permanence. When she finally departed, the station lights dwindled behind her. The continent receded into shadow. From the airplane window she saw the endless white below, seamless and inscrutable. Somewhere under that skin of frozen light, the earth still held its secrets. Maybe they would surface one day, maybe not. The difference no longer felt urgent. What mattered was that the ice existed at all, that it could shelter the truth for eons and return it unspoiled whenever the world was ready to learn again. As Antarctica faded into cloud, Isla understood what the planet had been trying to say through storm and silence, through heat and freeze alike. Nothing is truly lost. Knowledge, like water, only changes form. The ice may melt, revealing stone, relic, or perfect emptiness. But even emptiness has a voice. Listening to it, she felt no triumph, only belonging. The secret beneath the stars was not buried in the ice after all. It was the simple, infinite wonder of being here to uncover it.